I will call the Amherst Pelham Regional School Committee to order at 6:31 on October 25th, and I will attempt a roll call vote. Stephen?
Sullivan here.
Welcome. Craig?
Craig here.
Jennifer?
Jennifer here.
Peter?
Peter here.
Margaret?
Margaret here.
Sarah Bess?
Sarah Bess here.
And Ben here. Is that accurate? 7 so far. All right. So we are called to order then.
Okay, I'll call the Shutesbury School Committee to order, and I'll ask each representative to state their name. So Dan Hayes, Shutesbury School Committee. Steve?
Julie Martell, Shutesbury School Committee.
Thank you.
Jennifer
Bethany
Taylor. Oops, sorry. Go ahead, Bethany.
Bethany Rose, Shutesbury School Committee.
Jennifer Taylor, Shutesbury School Committee. I'm the one who called in. I apologize. My internet went down right before the meeting started. I'm trying to troubleshoot.
Perfect, thank you.
Steve Sullivan, Shutesbury School Committee.
Thank you.
And so we are here to discuss the bus arrival time. So Mike, you want to cue that up and then?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. So for people in the public, just to understand, this is a joint topic between the Regional School Committee and the Shutesbury School Committee because it's of mutual interest, I would say benefit, but we'll see. But that's why we're starting the meeting here so that our good friends in Shutesbury didn't have to wait for the rest of the meeting to engage in a topic that affects both of us. For those interested in making public comment, there's a public comment period that'll be right after the conclusion of the joint meeting, which on the agenda is about 25 minutes. We'll see. Maybe we'll be quicker. Maybe we will be more deliberate. I'm not sure. But the topic at hand came up at a regional meeting about a month ago. And the topic is that our current routes, particularly going to the town of Shutesbury, are not consistently arriving at the middle school, high school in time for the bell to ring. And I've received significant public feedback from secondary school families from the town of Shutesbury about the impact it's having on our students. And that feedback has continued. Things have gotten better since the first couple of weeks of school, and I want to thank Rupert, who you'll hear from in a little bit, our facilities director, through some creative use of routes and some other modifications. But the fact remains that we can't guarantee in this what I would say is the best driving conditions in Shutesbury that we'll have probably for the remainder of the year once snow and ice and mud season starts. We know the routes get slower in the town of Shutesbury for many people. And so what we're trying to do is some creative problem solving and trying to find a solution. I want to note that thank you, Superintendent Colquhoun, for being here. I really appreciate, and I think I said this at the last meeting, I'm going to say it again with the larger audience, that we are very close colleagues. We communicate and collaborate all the time, not just on snow days, but on a whole range of issues. And it's a very warm and collegial relationship. And this issue we brought to our school committees because this is just one we weren't able to resolve ourselves. And it had implications that were broader than many of the other issues that we've worked on. And we did want the school committees to weigh in about how to move forward in this conundrum. And I think, unfortunately, we don't have a perfect solution that resolves all issues without some unintended consequences. And I think with my hat on, which is a regional hat, it's that we have a group of students from one town in particular who are arriving at school late every day, or just about every day, and not 1 or 2 minutes late, but more significant than that. And that's affecting their educational progress, their program, the time on learning they're receiving. And it's a huge source of frustration for families and for our staff members who do not want to exclude Shutesbury Secondary School families from the instructional program at the beginning of a period, but are forced with a really impossible choice. And I think our teachers are doing an amazing job trying to manage that, but it's not a sustainable model. I think the challenge, of course, is that any change has implications for the elementary school. And that's why I appreciate Jennifer and Jacqueline. Thank you so much for being here, as well as the Shutesbury School Committee, to try to iron out what are some approaches that we can look at to try to improve the current situation. My last appreciation will be for Mr. Roy Clark, Rupert, for coming up with, and it was in the agenda packet, a number of scenarios, some a little more realistic than others, but trying to leave no stone unturned to walk through. So I thought maybe, oh, I should say the last thing, sorry, this is a long introduction, apologize, is that last week, Superintendent Colquhoun and I, as well as Rupert and some other folks, met with the chairs of the Pelham Elementary School Committee, the Amherst Elementary School Committee, the Regional School Committee, and then representative from Leverett and Shutesbury to try to, make sure there was shared understanding across the multiple school committees in our funky bureaucratic organization and governance model about what some of the issues are and what are potential solutions. Rupert continues to work on others. Right now, there really isn't another one that's emerged, unfortunately, as a viable option. So I think at this point, unless Superintendent Colquhoun would like to jump in, and you're welcome to, I would turn it over to our facilities director, Mr. Roy Clark, to go over some of the options, but I see there's a hand up, so I'll defer to Mr. Hayes and Mr. Harrington.
Yeah, you can go ahead.
Sorry, there are several Shutesbury folks that are trying to get into the meeting that say they are asking to join, but they aren't being let in yet.
So everyone who's come, I'm the host along with Maylene, everyone who's asked, which has been numerous, has been allowed into the meeting. So I'm not sure what the scenario is by which they're not, but there's probably, usually we have like 2 or 3 that asked to come in the meeting. We had about 8 or 9 tonight, and they were all let in. So I know the system
Yeah,
is.
I'm getting the same emails from parents asking to be let in.
You might just want to double check they've got the correct link. It's happened to me. There are a lot of links out there.
They're using the one from the website when they click on the Shutesbury Amherst School Committee meeting link.
Can maybe someone put a link in the chat so that we can share that out?
Absolutely. I'll do that right now. Thank you. That's a great idea.
So while Dr. Morris is placing that link in the chat, I just want to concur with Dr. Morris. We've collaborated for many years now, and I really appreciate the collaboration that we have between Shutesbury, Leverett, and the region, Union 28 and the region. So thank you very much, Dr. Morris.
That link came through.
So it's the same URL as what's in your browser right now. So you can just copy and paste that as well.
And I did get a couple of requests. So whoever's communicating that link to people, I appreciate it. And with that, is it okay if I turn to Mr. Roy Clark to share some options that he developed? Rupert, do you want to present the screen, or would you like to just talk through it? How would you like to approach this?
I'm thinking the screen will be a distraction, and let's just sort of talk in general terms. Mike, were you thinking that I would share the 6 main ideas that I had shared with you previously?
Yeah, I think a summary of them. I mean, especially since some of them are less feasible, okay, or sort of get around the edges of the problem without solving it. I think maybe focusing on the ones that are most viable first, and then maybe mentioning the other ones after.
Sure. If I may, I'd like to start out just by saying, I think everybody is working really hard to try to get the kids to high school as quickly as possible, and we're all stuck in a hard place. I've been up to Shutesbury Elementary School in the morning when buses are unloading, and they're doing a fantastic job getting kids off the bus as quickly as possible. I've followed 5-star buses in my car, and they are not dilly-dallying at all. They're doing their best And everyone is trying really hard to get all the kids there as quickly as possible, and it's just a tough situation. And so there are a couple of different ways to try to alleviate the situation. If we were able to get the secondary routes to start their runs earlier, then obviously they could get to the high school earlier. But that's problematic for the elementary schools because they have to drop off the elementary kids first. And there's a limit to how early they can drop the kids off there. Similarly, if the high school could have its day start later, we could get there on time. But there are also contractual arrangements with staff at the high school. There are sports, there are after-school jobs for kids who really need to work. So that's problematic as well. So then the other solutions, I mean, we can't shorten the roads. I tried ordering one on eBay and it still hasn't come in, that road shortener. So the solutions are complex. We've looked at a couple of possibilities, ranging from hiring more drivers, purchasing more buses, to rearranging our routes. One concept was to double up a couple of Shrewsbury elementary routes to free up one of the buses to start its secondary route earlier. That makes that route kind of long. Another possibility that we've considered is on some of those routes carrying elementary and secondary kids on their way to Shrewsbury Elementary, drop off the elementary kids, and then continue on to the high school. That saves a lot of time, but raises other issues and concerns for some members of the public. Right now we have, as is true in so many arenas, difficulty hiring qualified trained staff. So it's not like we can just find another bus driver, hire them, and throw them behind a bus. I've got buses on order. It's going to take up to 9 months to get buses from the factory, or maybe longer. Our bus contractor 5 Stars in the same situation. They're hiring and training as quickly as they can, but all in all, it's a tough situation all around, and the obvious solutions, none of them are available to us. The solutions which are low cost to the school districts are higher cost in terms of length of ride for the kids on the bus, for instance. So we're just full of unhappy trade-offs, whichever way we turn. And continue to work with 5 Star Bus. We're trying to see if there's a way that we can modify a few routes to free up a bus driver, but it's still a work in progress, and I don't have a good answer for anybody to share at this time. But I think that's it in a nutshell. Mike or Jen, you've been at previous meetings. Do you think I've missed anything, or is there anything you wish I would amplify?
From my perspective, you've covered, I think, everything we've discussed through meetings and emails. I don't know if Dr. Morris has anything else he could add.
No, I agree with you. I think the only thing I'd share is all of the solutions I want to acknowledge are suboptimal, as is the current situation. And I think that's where we are struggling with this, is that I feel for the secondary kids. They're having, quite literally a less positive experience because of the arrival time of the buses. And we heard at our last meeting from one of our student reps. Sorry, I went mute. It's not just that they're missing the beginning of the class, but they're also, for students who have athletic equipment, music equipment, they're scrambling to try to find a place for it. and it's adding incredible stress to their mornings. And so, I just want to note that I wish Rupert's done incredible work. This is not a critique. It's that I wish there was some solution that didn't involve some unintended consequences elsewhere. But the current situation for our students has broad implications. And, I really do worry about, affecting grades and future, choices that folks have when they're done. We have gotten emails from families who are saying they've just given up and they're driving their kids every morning at great personal, talk about gas prices and literal costs, but not so much a literal cost, but it's influencing when they're getting to work. And so, we're talking about the students, but it's having a significant impact on families as well. So that's sort of where we are, I think, at the moment. And maybe it's a good time to open it up to questions for anyone from either committee at this point, if it's okay with the two chairs.
Yeah. And we'll start off with Jennifer. Go ahead.
I have a procedural question for Ben or Dan. Is there going to be public comment in this meeting before the Shutesbury Elementary Committee adjourns? Just because I see many non-members in the Google Meet, and I assume they're here because they are interested in the topic and might have something to say, but it's not in the agenda. There's no public comment on the agenda before, but I just wanted to know if those folks are going to have a chance for public comment today.
Michael, if I'm not mistaken, I believe you said there would be a public comment period at some point, correct?
That is correct. I think what Jennifer is, oh no, Jennifer, you can speak for yourself. I didn't mean to.
Yeah, it's in the agenda after the Shutesbury Committee adjourns. So I guess my question is, will there be public comment before you guys adjourn?
I think if there's no objections, we could have public comment based on what we're talking about here, and then the second section. Go ahead, Peter. If you have
Yeah, I was just going to say, procedurally, as long as the chairs would like to do it and there's no objection and we don't have to debate it, public comment is not doesn't fall within the you didn't post it within 48 hours, right? It's a procedural aspect of the meeting, and so as long as there's consent, you're free to do it.
I agree. Yep.
I'm sorry, Ben. I'm fine with that.
Yeah. So since I have the floor here for a moment, I guess I'll take a minute to say a few words. A lot of this, and I want to also recognize everyone that's involved. We are partners. We all want to resolve this. I do think that, changing the time in Amherst has resulted in the issues here. I am concerned about time on learning, and that I had was, could we do something in regards to the morning, perhaps having some sort of buffer, like whatever they might have a opening in the morning for a few minutes for students to gather before they go to their first class. I know I did speak with Dr. Morris about that, and I believe they've moved that to the afternoon, which allows for students to be let out early for athletic programs. So it's a little concerning for me, because I feel like, Shutesbury has made a lot of concessions, starting their school time later. And I think that although we've allowed for a buffer in the afternoon for athletics, we haven't allowed a buffer in the morning, which results directly on time on learning. So the changing of the times in Amherst has had an impact throughout, including Shutesbury, Leverett, Pelham, and Amherst. So that is a concern of mine. Thank you. Yeah, Mike, go ahead.
Thanks, Dan. And I just want to note a couple of things. One is that respectfully, the region changed the start time. It wasn't Amherst. So the change in start time, the benefits, we just had a large amount of feedback presented at our last meeting, were are equally felt in terms of the impact on student sleep time and all those benefits. So I think it's important to note that this wasn't done with Amherst in mind. It was done with all students at the region in mind, and the benefits that come from all of them. And in fact, the earliest bus pickups used to be in Shutesbury and Leverett. So those bus pickups, in terms of who was losing the most sleep and who was getting up the earliest, was always impacting those students the most. So I do think I just want to round out that picture. Changing the schedules is in our contract to regional schools. To change the schedule, it needs to be proposed by the principal by December 1st of a year. There needs to be multiple sessions for staff input and a decision made by February 1st the prior year. So the ability for us to change the schedule right now is really limited by our contract, separate from, whether there's, merit. I'm not speaking to the merit of the suggestion, but based on our contract with our teachers, we cannot make changes to our contract without a formal process and a proposal and feedback session. So that's not going to be a solution that we can implement during the course of this academic year.
And seeing this in order, we'll go Craig and then Julie. You're muted.
Thanks, Ben. I put a hand down, but not the voice on. I was part of the meeting that we had that you were talking about, Mike, and there was a document that Rupert prepared that we discussed. Are any of these ideas going to be presented tonight for further discussion, or there was additional information that was requested at that meeting for consolidating a K through 12 bus? Is there any? So I appreciated Rupert's presentation or your description of the conundrum we're in. But there are ideas that are out there that are thought out and have pros and cons. I'm just wondering if we're here to discuss those.
And
I guess that question is directed to Mike and Rupert.
Sure. So, I mean, I can try to do a summary of that meeting. Is that my notes indicate that the option that you mentioned, and that same document was in our packets, Craig, and I put the link on it to it in the chat. And so the option that got the most sort of interest, and I want to be really clear, it wasn't a commitment that was made by anyone at the meeting, but the one that seemed to garner the most interest was the one you just mentioned, the K-12 option. And one of the follow-ups was the length of the bus ride, particularly for the secondary students, because they would be picked up, at their neighborhood spots. There'd be a drop-off at the Shutesbury Elementary School and then heading to the middle school, high school. And I know Rupert did. I don't know why I switched with our Shutesbury friends here, but we tend to go by first name in our committee, and all of a sudden I'm calling everyone by Mr. and all that. So I'm going to revert back to our commitments of first names, and so I'm going to go back to Rupert because he did do some background work on what that route would look like. Rupert, do you have more to share on that particular piece? Thank you, Craig.
Yes, may I? I can lower my hand. It's telling me I can lower my hand. Okay, I lowered my hand. Aye, aye, sir. Right. So the K-12 option is kind of an interesting option. I can tell you that the route that's been running the latest, which covers Locks Pond Road, Wendell Road, and portions of Leverett Road in Shutesbury, has about 25 elementary kids and about 25 secondary kids that are eligible to ride the bus because they live in those areas at least some days a week. It would be feasible for us to fit those 50 kids on a bus from beginning at the bottom of Locks Pond, drop them off at Shutesbury, and then continue the route on to the high school with the 25 kids that were there, plus the additional 13 or so that would complete that route. My preliminary investigation suggests, and this will vary depending on how many kids are actually riding the bus and a bunch of other conditions, but certainly that route would be no longer for the high school kids than the route that covers the north side of Lake Wyola and North Leverett Road from the town of Shutesbury. Typically, and I look back several years at the history, typically our longest bus routes for secondary are from that area, and they are 50 plus minutes, probably 55 plus minutes. We try to keep them under an hour. It would mean that the kids on the south side of Lake Wyola would have a similar length ride as the kids on the north side of Lake Wyola. The elementary kids, currently that route, I think, nominally is 20 some odd minutes. For the elementary kids, it would probably be a little bit longer, but not significantly longer. So what it looks like to me at first cast, and we haven't been out there with a school bus to test my timings, but what it looks like is we could start such a route somewhere around 10 of or 5 of 8, drop elementary kids off somewhere around 8:20, 8:25, and get our secondary kids to the high school somewhere around 8:50, 8:55. You know, these will depend on ridership because not everybody chooses to ride. This will depend on, you know, weather conditions and all the other things that make transportation always a kind of an approximate business in terms of timing. Craig, I think that sort of roughly answers the question you were asking about timing. My estimates right now, probably 55 minutes, give or take, for secondary kids, probably somewhere around 30 minutes, give or take, for the elementary kids, if we were to combine the K-12 route. I'd like to just add the feedback that I've gotten from my drivers is their experience when they are doing combined elementary and secondary routes is that typically what happens is the older kids take the seats in the back and they are engaged with each other. They are engaged with their telephones. The younger kids sit near the front where they can be closely monitored by the driver. And those kids in between tend to want to emulate the older kids. So they gravitate towards the back. They are less likely to be engaged in behavior that is trying to, in some ways, show off to the younger kids because they're trying to look mature for the older kids. So our experience, what I'm hearing from the bus drivers, our experience is these kind of K-12 routes don't necessarily lead to any kind of great concern in terms of behavioral issues. Thank you.
Julie, go ahead.
Well, this is funny because I feel like I'm 5 minutes before on the topic. So I think I would like to actually just speak to some of the things that you just said, Rupert, and then I would like to sort of go back to what my initial comment was. But I would say that I'm surprised to hear that there would be a 7:55 a.m. start of the route because it's my understanding that the elementary school for this Locks Pond Road already starts right around there. So I would think it would be earlier to pick up. Also, I don't actually think that I think the estimate for how long the route is actually off already. I think it's more like 38 minutes now. So it would definitely be a lot more, I think, personally. I also, as a parent, I have a lot of qualms about the idea of a K through 12 route. I understand what you're hearing. I guess I would wonder how many routes at this point do you have that are K through 12 in our area? Like who is this subset that you're hearing from that already have K through 12 routes? Because um, I see that as a serious concern of a lot of parents. In fact, we've had emails come in just today about this is like a huge concern for parents when they hear about this issue. Another thing that I would like to say is when you talk about how changing the length, like there are already contracts, and changing the length of the school day at this point is problematic and would take a lot to change. I would just like to point out that also SES, their teachers also have contracts. So changing that start time, or in Pelham, changing that start time, same problematic issue. And I am concerned that I feel like Shutesbury is sort of understood that we have the longest way to go, that we have treacherous roads, understood all of that. Believe me, we live here, so we know it. But I will say that I feel like maybe to me, the answers aren't in this pack of 6 suggestions. So I just want to keep an eye on the idea that, like, thank you for having those suggestions and really thinking it out. I'm not sure. This is like a 6-pack lineup to me. Like, it might not actually be any of the perps in this 6-pack. It might be some totally other solution that is completely outside of this. So I do want to kind of keep the open mind for some out of the box considerations. And I also am wondering if there are other routes that aren't as far from the high school where there could be some doubling up of routes to help free up busing for Shutesbury, given that it's always a problematic, really lengthy ride, and now you're adding more riders to each bus. It seems like maybe that, like, there might be some other routes, given that it's a regional problem. Maybe it needs a regional solution and not just look at like Shutesbury to solve Shutesbury problem. I know that's not what you're doing, so I don't want to make it seem like that, but I'm just saying, like, I just really think we have to think outside the box on this one, because I don't see that a lot of the solutions that are proposed would actually work for Shutesbury kids. And that's all I'll say. I'll hop off now.
I'm so sorry to interject. I don't have a raise my hand on the phone. So if it's okay if I make a comment, but I can wait my turn too.
That's Jen Taylor, by the way.
That's Jen Taylor. Yes, sorry.
Yeah, I was gonna say we'll give Rupert a chance to respond to that, and then you can go right after that. That work.
Yeah.
So the primary problem with getting the kids from the far reaches of Shutesbury, the high school, incorporates the time it takes to get from whatever elementary school they're starting at to their starting point. So, I mean, we could look at, Leverett or Pelham or Amherst buses. It becomes a cascading effect. I did take a look at what would happen if we expanded the Pelham routes into southern Shutesbury. That would relieve some of the pickups on southern Shutesbury so that we could re-manage those routes. And that is in the packet as one of the suggestions. I don't have a lot of confidence that we'll get that much wiggle room out of it. It's a possibility. It's, I think, problematic for Pelham because, for their situation with them receiving kids earlier is the same problem as Shutesbury has, and I don't want to, I don't know how to deal with that. In terms of the estimates of time, like the 38-minute estimate of time, I'm not quite sure what you're referring to, so I can't really respond to that. But what I'm saying is, if we had a K-12 route, to be generous and assuming that all of the kids that live on those roads chose to take the bus, my feeling is that the elementary routes would be around half an hour for the elementary kids and around an hour for the secondary kids, hopefully shorter. And I think that that's probably accurate and reasonable, and it is has some kind of parity with other long routes in the area. I'm not sure what else I needed to respond to because I forgot to take notes.
Rupert, I can jump in on one that I think was asked, which is what's our K-12 experience? So that's generally our summer school programming, and that is primarily students with special needs, English language learner students who are riding the bus for our summer programs, because that's where the bulk of our summer programs are. They're geographically larger areas because of the nature of summer school. We have much fewer buses, so the rides do tend to be quite long. But the population of those buses tends to be primarily students with special needs and English language learners.
Thank you, Mike. And I just would like to add that, in other parts of the country that are rural, K-12 is the norm rather than the exception. So it's not a weird thing. It's just unusual in our district at this time outside of summer school.
And Right. Yeah. And we had someone on the phone. What was the name?
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Jennifer Taylor with Shutesbury School Committee. So I live on Wendell Road. I live very close to the school. I'm about 3 minutes away. And I can tell you the bus drives by my house at 7:30, pretty much on the dot every morning to start the route. So they're starting at around 7:40 to get the kids to school by 8:15. And I can tell you sometimes they're 10 minutes later than they're expected, which is at 8:08 at our house, because at times the bus gets crazy. There are times where they have to stop the bus and pull over and talk to the kids and try and get them to calm down because it's a really long ride. And some of the kids on that bus have needs, including my daughter. She has a really hard time on that bus already because the kids are throwing their backpacks around. It's very loud. And I can't imagine doubling the number of kids on the bus. I can tell you that I have lived in a district with my older daughter where we had a K through 12, and it was not a good experience having the older kids with the younger kids. And just the idea of doubling the amount of students on the bus feels overwhelming to me already. Unfortunately, I'm a parent who has to be at work at 8 a.m., so I can't even put her on the bus. My mom puts her on the bus and probably wouldn't be able to drive her in every morning. So this would pose a personal problem for me. And she would have a much longer ride from my mom's house, which is up by Lake Wyola as well. But I know that several of the parents are really concerned about the idea of combining, just because our kids are already so crammed in on that bus. During the pandemic, there was a point where we had 3 kids in a seat because we were short a bus. And so it got really very problematic during that period of time. I was transporting my daughter back and forth because she was refusing to ride the bus. It was just too chaotic. So there's already a lot of issues with that bus. And there are times where that bus arrives to school 10 minutes late as it is now. So I'm not sure how putting more kids on the bus is going to get the kids to the high school and middle school earlier. I just wanted to put that out there. Thank you.
Can I ask, can you clarify if you're talking about the elementary route or the secondary route?
I'm talking about the elementary route.
Thank you.
Just a quick reminder before I take the next person. We'll be doing public comment after the discussion. So I'll just let folks know that. So I'll take Peter next.
Yeah, so I appreciate hearing all this perspective. Obviously, I don't get a chance to hear directly from Shutesbury Elementary School Committee, so it's nice to hear your voices directly. I mean, my basic tact on this is the status quo is not acceptable. Like we can't endlessly debate this, hoping for a creative solution to materialize that has no disadvantages. I'm all for out of the box thinking, but what is that, right? Like, and people have been banging their heads at this for a long time now, and we have 6 proposals in the document. So just to focus on, problem solving mentality, what I think our mindset should be is we know no solution is going to be optimal. We know a current status quo is not acceptable, and we can't just endlessly go on with this. And so we need to pick the best solution available, the least unpreferred solution, if you will, and go with that. So, I mean, just looking at the calendar, our next regional meeting is November 8th. I think that's 2 weeks. I think that's a reasonable deadline. We're into November, and our regional kids from Shutesbury are getting to school late every day, and that's I just can't endorse a process where we continue to do that. So, in terms of like the 6 specific options. Options 4 through 6 to me feel like non-starters given the cost implications. And so I'm happy to support whatever of the first 3 options that Shutesbury Elementary School Committee prefers, whether that's allow earlier morning drop-off, which is option 1, merge 2 SES bus routes, which is option 2, merge elementary and region routes, which is option 3, or another option another creative solution that hasn't come in. But at some point you have to, just pick a cutoff point and say, okay, we've exhausted our creative potential, and now we just need to pick it. So that's how I feel right now.
You just checking. Did you intentionally put your hand down, Margaret, or? Okay, cool. So we'll go to Jennifer and then back to Rupert there. Jennifer Shaw, my bad. Sorry.
Thanks. So yeah, this is a really, really tricky, really difficult situation. And I really hear the concerns of the Shutesbury members and Shutesbury parents about option 3, which is the K through 12 option. But so I guess I have a question, which is that are there bus monitors? Is there a second adult on the bus besides the driver? No, it's just the driver. Like, is that an option to have a bus monitor? And would that help at all? Would that help with the concerns of the kids' behaviors and the younger kids being uncomfortable? It's just a thought.
And I'll let Rupert speak to that, and then I'll take Sarah Bess.
I think a lot depends on the monitor. It has similar financial implications as some of the other solutions of finding staff that would be willing to work for an extra half hour early in their day. I wanted to also, I've been working with 5-Star, and I'm told that last week all of the buses had arrived at the high school, or this week, all the buses have arrived at the high school for the past week by 9. So things have improved. Some of that could be because of the number of parents that are driving their kids in, which is an unhappy consequence. But I'd be remiss if I didn't say, things have improved, things are better now. I think Mike and I are looking forward to the winter to try to proactively deal with situations that'll happen when road conditions get worse for the winter. Thank you.
Sarah Bess, go ahead.
Thanks. So I hear a lot of people having big feelings about this, which I think is totally warranted, right? Like, we're worried about our kids when we put them on the bus and how they get to school and making sure they're there on time. And I also hear that, like, we need a solution because what's happening right now, it isn't working. So my suggestion is I appreciate what Peter said about picking something between 1 and 3, because right now that's what we can do. And then continue to work on our creative solutions, right? Like, what if we just use this as a bus stop on our way to get to something better, right? Like, we need something that's going to, get our elementary kids where they need to be in a safe place at a safe time, and get our high school kids, secondary kids, to where they need to be at a safe place at a safe time, right? So we need a solution, even if it's just a temporary one. And then, we can continue working on more ideas, because I think it was Julie that said, like, maybe our best choice isn't on this list. So we can keep thinking about it and trying to find something else that will also work. But in the meantime, we need something that, is going to improve our current status.
Jen, go ahead.
When we are looking at options and we're looking at the top options, just please be reminded that we start school at 8:15, and we already did negotiations to move our start time from 8:30 to 8:15. And so starting any earlier really isn't an option for Shutesbury. So before we start talking about which ones work, that one won't work.
And we've also already tried to help by letting the kids off the bus at 8:10.
All right. Are there any other comments from members of either school committee? If not, I'd like to open it up to public comment and see what some folks have to say. So you can just go ahead and use the raise your hand feature at the bottom, and then I'll call on you based on that. I swore I saw one earlier. I'm trying to coax you out here.
Just a quick question, Ben. If you could just let everyone know the duration of the public comment section and how long each public comment can be, I think it would help people so there's no confusion.
Well, my current estimate would be 0 minutes for duration, but 3 minutes per comment per person. And I'm willing to hear from whoever's there. I don't know if Dan has any different feelings about that. There we go. Martina.
You are muted, Martina.
The mute unmute is towards the bottom left. If you haven't used Google Meets, maybe you have, but just I know for some people who use Zoom, the muting and unmuting is in a different spot. So if you look at the bottom of your screen, there should be about 2, 4, 6, 7 icons, and the one all the way to the left is a microphone, and that clicks on or off for the mute unmute.
The space bar does the same thing for some apps.
Control D at the same time is also an option.
My computer. Mike, can you unmute her?
No, it doesn't give. I can only mute people. I can't unmute.
Can she maybe type in the chat?
It looks like she's a statement, and so I wonder if
chat.
Yeah, we can try to do that. In general, we keep the chat closed in terms of security because we have had some folks, but Maylene and I can keep a close eye on it. So Martina, the chat should be open if you'd like to use that feature. Martina, just to be clear, there was no presumption that you would be inappropriate on the chat. It's much more about the control of the meeting and people who aren't here for the purpose of the meeting. It was certainly not directed towards you, to be clear.
Oh. Thank you very much, and thank you for being patient enough to push your way through that. Did we need to read it out, or does it?
Yeah, I think it's just just for posterity in case the chat doesn't get saved with the recording.
Yeah. Anyone want to volunteer to do that?
I can read it. That's fine. My kiddo gets picked up on the other SES route at 7:40 and gets to school at 8:15. And did I miss?
Yep.
Oh, yeah, there we go. I have concerns. I'm sorry. I skipped down. Start time is 8:15 at SES at Shutesbury Elementary School. I have concerns for kiddos at 4 or 5 being picked up for 30 plus minutes. My kiddo gets picked up on the other SES route at 7:40 and gets to school at 8:15. I think that was the core content that was shared. Thank you for that, Martina. I'm sorry about the computer issues.
Perfect. Thank you for navigating your way through that. That was not easy. Are there any other public comments? Oh, Melissa, we'll take you.
Hi, my name's Melissa Warwick. I am a parent of a, oh gosh, a third grader, a sixth grader at the elementary school, and a 10th grader at the high school. I guess my concern is I grew up in Conway, so meaning Massachusetts, not New Hampshire. So I do understand rural busing from a student point of view. In elementary school, we did do the K through 12 model, and I have very distinct memories of high schoolers bringing alcohol on the bus and, you know, doing other very inappropriate things. So for me, you know, if that is the only option at this point, a bus monitor would really, I feel like, be a necessity. My other comment is, you know, I apologize. I missed part of the early on conversation that I believe Rupert was talking about the different options and what would work and what wouldn't. You know, I did hear combining routes. Is combining some of Amherst's routes possible to free up a bus instead of Shutesbury combining routes? And that's all.
Thank you. And I guess Jamie or Jaime? Jaime?
It's Jamie. Thank you. This is Jamie Donta. I have two kids at in the Amherst schools, one at the middle school and one at the high school, but we live in Shutesbury up on Montague Road. And I'm going to apologize because I'm late to this whole discussion. I didn't realize it was happening really, but I'm glad that Julie let me know because I have been in contact with the transportation department at the school already. Because my daughter, the older kid, is getting to school 20 minutes late regularly, is convinced that she's going to fail her class. But more than that, I really feel like it's an equity issue in terms of free breakfast, that, you know, kids need the opportunity to get free breakfast. And if you're late for school, you can't do that. So that concerns me very much. But I think that everybody agrees that it's really a problem that needs to be fixed, so I won't harp on that. It just seems to me from this discussion, a couple of people have said that solutions 1 through 3 are possible and solutions 4 through 6 are non-starters for primarily financial reasons, I guess. But it seems like, based on my read, that solutions 1 through 3 are the ones where Shutesbury has to make concessions. And solutions 4 through 6 involve other towns making concessions. And I don't feel that the Shutesbury kids should be punished for where they live. So I would be encouraged to hear more discussion about what other options are possible that are more equitable in terms of impacts, like Melissa said about possibly combining other bus routes to free up a bus. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. And do we have any other public comments on this topic? Look, I'll go to Margaret real quick here.
Is it appropriate? I'm sorry, I should have probably asked this question before when you were doing committee discussion. So, you know, we've talked about how it's going to, if you could get a bus driver, it would cost money, and there are a couple ways to do it. It would be through 5-Star getting a bus and driver, or for us doing it, but no actual cost has been mentioned. And I think it would be really useful to understand at least an estimate of what we would be talking about, because that might determine whether it would be something we would want to try to start to work on.
Yeah, Mike, go ahead.
So I don't have a specific cost. Rupert and I have had that conversation, but I think with the rental of a bus and then hiring of a driver, if both of those things were feasible, the combination would be nearing 6 digits, if not 6 digits. So to be explicit, you know, nearing $100,000, if not at that place in terms of the labor costs, the fuel costs, and the rental of the vehicle costs. So that's sort of in the realm of what we're talking about here.
Okay.
Might I just make, I know it seems like we're wrapping up, and if there's no other public comment, I mean, maybe you can open it up, see if anyone else wants to make a public comment, and I'd like to say something before we close this topic, if that's okay with the chairs.
Yep.
I can leave my hand on just in case, so if anyone else jumps in, then they're welcome to.
Sorry, Michael, I just have a quick question. So, you know, we have an idea of what it would cost to add another bus, but by combining buses and reducing, would we reduce a bus? Is there cost savings by doing anything here?
I think I can jump in. Rupert, you can certainly, or do you want to answer that one, or do you want me to? Whatever you like.
I'm happy
You
to
can
answer
start.
that.
How about that, Rupert? I'll start.
Go for it. Go for it.
So that kind of what some of the suggestions that are being mentioned have already happened. So I put in the chat another presentation from last month, which we typically in the district, in the region, have had Shutesbury routes be for Shutesbury students, Leverett routes be for Leverett students. And we have seen where there's neighboring towns, and we've broken those lines. So a lot of the work that folks are very reasonably suggesting has already been completed by our transportation department already. So, and the routes that tend to be geographically close to the middle school and high school are very full with students, right? Because the nature of it is you can get more stops in because you're not doing as much driving to the school. The further you get from the school, the fewer students and stops there are, because that bus to get there on time has to have fewer. If it had the same number of stops and students on it, it would never get to the school. So I think in terms of density of bus population, the closer you live to the school, the more likely you are to have a very, very full bus. The further you are from the school, you're drastically less likely, unless you've some high density housing far from the school, you're not. And that's not unique to our district. That's every district. That's how you're going to get the bus runs to be, as equalized as possible. So if you happen to live close to the middle school, high school, your route isn't 5 minutes, because we're picking up a tremendous number, relatively a large number of students with a large number of stops en route to that school, because you don't have to do that much driving from the stops to the school. So I think a lot of the suggestions that have been made are really excellent. And, I think I really want to appreciate our transportation department for breaking down those town walls and already doing that work to combine routes. But because those routes are full with students close to the school, it's not just about the time it would take. It was literally, there's not enough seats on the bus to combine routes because they're already full. The routes that have lots of empty seats tend to be the ones further from the school. But Rupert, I'm sorry, you can jump in, and please disagree with me if anything I said was inaccurate.
No, I agree with everything you said. I'm not sure what more I can add. I had a few ideas, but they've gone out of my head at this late hour. So I'm sorry, Dan. No, I don't remember what I was going to say.
And just a follow up, Amherst, you don't own the buses that you have there? That we would have to rent one?
So we own a very small fleet of buses, full-size buses, and then Five Star owns a huge fleet of buses. But we are at capacity. We don't have spare buses that we could run reliably that are available to add to a route or create a new route. In an emergency, we can take a bus that's old and beat up and hope that it makes it, but it's not reliable. It's not something that I want to count on, and especially not out in areas where the roads are rough and the cell phone coverage is less than optimal.
Yep. And if I could add to that, just to be clear, the Amherst Public Schools, the town of Amherst buys the buses and the region leases them, which, the idea is that reduces the financial impact of the capital budgets of the 4-member towns. So that's actually a natural benefit for the region as compared to the town of Amherst.
I'll take Julie real quick, and then if there's no objection, look to Dan, so go ahead and wrap up. All right, go ahead. I
guess I just want to say that I I understand the 6 figures. It does sound cost prohibitive. This does seem like it is a concern that comes up year after year, that we are so close to the bone that that there is no error for margin. There is no room. It does seem like maybe this actually is a time to invest in order to make it so that it's not a continual emergency. And I guess I just also would like to echo what Jamie said about it being literal access and equity. And that should be a priority also. So
And I'm sorry, when I said what I said earlier, that I was responding to Dan's question. It wasn't what I wanted to say at the end of the meeting. If it's possible to very briefly say a couple things with Dan and Ben, that'd be helpful. So I think, just 3 things I want to say. I want to appreciate the Shutesbury members and members of the public for coming tonight. I want to, again, echo my continued appreciation of the collaboration with I'm just going to say Jennifer, because that's our form, or Jen, with that. The second thing I want to say is, I think everything people shared in terms of concerns is absolutely legitimate. But my third piece is a hint of frustration that I want to share, and really it's about our students. Our Shutesbury secondary students are not having the same experience as the other students in our district. I think the idea is the money is one thing. The ability to find a bus and a driver right now is equal, if not larger, concerns. And the reason that those options weren't seen as realistic wasn't the financial aspect, although that certainly is a feature. And I think there'd be an interesting conversation between the two bodies here tonight about how that cost share or non-cost share would work, right? I'm not interested in having that, because the reality is we are scrambling every day to make sure we have enough drivers to drive our buses, just like every other district. We are not unique and in any regard. So the idea of both finding a bus and finding an additional driver and managing last week, where we were literally combining routes because of a lack of drivers, just makes that not realistic. So, the cost is one piece, and I think it was a very legitimate question about what the cost is, Margaret. So I appreciate you asking it. But the reality is the labor is such in that field where we are struggling. You don't have to look far to find districts that are having even more troubles than we are in terms of labor and transportation. So I just wanted to clarify that the finances are certainly important, but the driving factor of why that was taken off wasn't the finance. It was the practicality of that is really in question. And I think the 2-week suggestion someone said makes sense, that was raised earlier about making a decision. I think if the decision is that we're not going to change anything in the region, then I think I'll need to have a conversation with just the regional school committee about how that looks, because this is not to dismiss any of the concerns shared. And yet when I have students at the regional school, middle school and high school students expressing extreme frustration, stress, and I think this was referenced by one of the commenters earlier, feeling like they're having a different experience. They are having a different experience, right? It's not as, disrespectfully, and some students are able to manage that in a different way than others. And our most vulnerable students from Shutesbury are the ones who are going to struggle the most with that. So I'm not at all suggesting that the concerns expressed tonight were not valid. They absolutely were. But we have a school system right now where we have dozens of students at the regional level from one town who are not having the same experience in a really negative manner as their colleagues. And that's a huge concern of mine. I know it's a huge concern of everyone on this call, but I do want to come back to that. I think if people have creative ideas, please send them my way, Jennifer's way. We'll talk about them. We'll bring them to Rupert and Union 28 team. This is not a closed shop by any stretch of the imagination. But it is a problem that I do feel urgency about, because the impact it's having on our students, why we're all here, is our kids. And I don't feel like the status quo is acceptable for the secondary students from Shutesbury, who already face a long commute, who already, sometimes feel, because of the geographic distance and other pieces, less connected to the region. I just have deep, deep concerns about their experience and the impact it's having on them. And I see our student rep has her hand up, so I will stop talking, but thank you. Sorry for my, spiel.
Fair enough. Tessa, go ahead, and then I'll turn it over to Dan.
Tessa, you're muted.
Oops. I'll just start by saying I've listened to this whole thing, and it does seem very complicated and something that I obviously don't know a lot about. But I think what's been like disregarded as an idea that was brought up earlier was just like changing the schedule a little bit at the high school, because it seems really hard to have buses get there on time. And I know that we can't move the like plus block at the high school to the beginning of the day, but I also feel like just to address like the breakfast problem and things like that, like we just need that 15 to 20 minutes at the beginning for students to be able to relax. And not, well, coming from a student perspective, I obviously would not mind having shorter classes because they already are so extremely long. And I just think that if we did have like a 20 to 30-minute period at the beginning of the day, that maybe we could play off as something to address mental health problems, or something to address like doing yoga, or like teachers could do like different, like this was brought up in the student representative committee. We were talking about like ways to engage students in the plus period because kids were leaving, kids weren't doing homework, stuff like that. Well, there's always going to be kids like that, but it was brought up for teachers to hold activities or things that students could do in the morning, or not in the morning, sorry, in the afternoon, to get them to engage in still being in school that late in the day. Like it was brought up to have open gym and stuff like that for kids to be able to go to different places instead of hanging out in the bathroom. And I think maybe is it really that hard to change the schedule? Probably. But if we were to have that like half an hour in the morning for it to be a ease into school period where it would still count as like in school learning or whatever, because you need the hours. But for something where it's more relaxed, or you can come in and ask your teacher a question that you've been meaning to answer, or like time for students to go to their guidance counselors. Like my friends have been going to their guidance counselors half an hour before school starts because they've been so slammed about like college stuff, and like already, like my friend from Shutesbury, Jaden, who's the other student rep, got to school half an hour early today just to meet with her guidance counselor because she has no other time to meet with them. And so maybe having that half an hour at the beginning of the day could solve all of the problems and also give kids a good way to ease into the day by starting, like imagine coming to school and starting your day with doing like yoga in the gym, or like just by going over like current news or something in whoever's room or something like that, like a good way to ease into the day, ease into learning, and that could benefit all students somehow. Something like that. I don't know, but I think that school is a lot and I could really use a break too. And I'm sure other students could also, and then that just seems like it would solve all the problems. Okay.
Huzzah!
Thank you. Awesome. And
I'm
turn.
so sorry. I'm on the phone again.
Okay.
If I can make one more quick comment, if possible.
And then I'll really turn it over to Dan.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. Just first one is how many seats are on the regular size bus?
So full-size bus can carry 71 or 72 elementary age kids with 3 kids to a seat. And I think it's something like 50 secondary age kids.
So we're talking about having 3 kids to a seat in Shutesbury. I think that's going to change the high schoolers and middle schoolers' experience as well, and they will have a longer route in the morning than they do currently, for sure. And I just think also, I don't think it's realistic that the bus is going to get there earlier. Having to pick up double the number of students, and I understand a lot of them will be at the same stops, but also they tried to combine stops here last year, and that didn't go well either because we have horrible roads for kids to try to walk on, especially elementary age kids, never mind elementary age kids with needs. I would say that honestly, I wish we had a needs bus in Shutesbury. I feel like we really should on this route already, and that's already a separate issue. But I really don't think it's going to be realistic for the middle and high to get there earlier. I think if anything, combining the bus could potentially make them get there, even around the same time as they're getting there now. So just want to put that out there because really this bus runs late already as it is. As I said, sometimes it gets to my house 10 minutes later than it should as it stands with half the amount of kids. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I do understand you're between a rock and a hard place. Thank you.
Okay, so I think we'll kind of narrow it down to three things. First of all, I would ask administration to maybe look at Tess's idea. I think looking at the schedule and being creative with the schedule, I think that's really the only creative area that we can maybe manipulate things to accommodate the needs of all students. That said, I think if we don't have the ability to do that, then we're looking at, I think it comes down to two options. Of those two, it seems to me that number two is the one that I believe has had the least resistance. So could we talk about that just for a minute before we end this meeting? What does option two, merging two SES bus routes, do? Talk a little bit about that, please.
So could I make a process suggestion?
Certainly.
So it's 7:42. You know, I don't want to speak for my regional colleagues, but I'll speak for myself that we have a number of other topics tonight. And I think option two was floated and received some critical feedback a while ago. So I've asked Rupert not to follow up as closely on that. But I think one of the pieces of feedback we could do is to create more information about that and be able to share it with both the Shutesbury School Committee and the Regional School Committee. I don't feel comfortable asking Rupert on the fly to respond to that. It's a reasonable question, Dan, totally, but it might be better to respond in writing in a week or something with more detail so that both committees could think about that as opposed to just pulling out of his back pocket.
Absolutely, Michael, and I believe this has been a process. I respect the fact that we want to come up with a solution as quickly as possible. I'm happy to hear that at this moment in time that start times seem to be pretty much on target. So inclement weather is coming. I think spending a little bit more time and choosing the right solution as opposed to picking the wrong solution because of expediency, we might be better off spending a little bit more time. So I would appreciate a little bit more time on that. And I think also Tessa's idea. And I am done. Ben, do you want me to close my meeting?
Sure.
Okay. I believe I can just adjourn. So Shutesbury School Committee meeting, it has been adjourned. Thank you all for your time.
Thank
Do
you.
appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
All right, and we'll continue on with regional business here. So first up, I have minutes from October 11th. Everybody have a chance to go over those and look for any tweaks, corrections, etc. It's so weird seeing all these panels just move. Anybody have any corrections or suggestions, etc., etc.? If no, I'll entertain a motion.
I move we approve the minutes from October 11th.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved by Jennifer, seconded by Margaret. And we will take a quick roll call vote in the absence of need for discussion. Start with Jennifer.
Jennifer, aye.
Craig.
Craig, aye.
Margaret.
Margaret, aye.
Stephen.
Stephen, aye.
Peter.
Peter, aye.
Sarah Bess.
Sarah Bess, aye.
And me, Ben, also aye. Passes unanimously with 2 folks missing. All right, so, next we have public comment. I have a few for viewing, and I suspect that we have some folks in here, so we'll do those second. I'm going to try to, now I'm going to try to present my screen. All right, can folks see that? Decent. All right. right. And I will look to any folks who are in the, oh, let me stop sharing. Thank you. I will look for any folks from the public who wish to comment now here. You can go ahead and click the raise hand function and so going once. Mary, go ahead.
Hi, thanks. I wasn't planning on commenting because I wasn't sure I'd be here, but I did submit a letter in support of continuing with the option 3, which Boosters has been vigorously trying to solicit some funds, private funds, in order to make this a reality for our students. Without reiterating completely our letter, we did do a lot of research to make an informed decision on why we advocate for and strongly are vigorously working for this to become a reality.
Thank you. And do we have any other public comments from folks in attendance here? Suzanne, go ahead.
Introduce yourself. Hi, I'm Patrick Schilling. I'm a father of 2 Amherst High School students. I'm also a coach of Amherst lacrosse, girls lacrosse in the spring. And I just want to add that this playing field has been studied and debated for over 10 years. And I think this is really about safety is what it comes down to. We've looked at the durability of doing a turf field versus doing a grass field. This goes back to the days of consultants coming in and looking at our playing fields. And really what we have to do is create safe, equitable, and playable surfaces for all sports. That includes the spring and the fall sports for both boys and girls. Thank you.
Thank you. We have any other public comments from folks in attendance here? All right, if there are no further public comments, we will move on to the superintendent's update.
Sure. I spoke before quite a bit, so I'll be brief on this side. So I want to congratulate our students. We had a homecoming dance over the weekend, and we had over 400 students there, and the behavior was phenomenal. Kids had a great time, and that's larger than we've had in a while, and sometimes large events can get challenging, and our students were really outstanding at focusing on what we want them to, which is enjoying the dance and not some of the other, extracurricular, so to speak, that sometimes happen when you have that many students all trying to enjoy each other. So thanks to the the faculty organizers and administration and parent volunteers, but just really want to appreciate our students for having a great time together. We had our final open house last week at Summit. It was a huge success because Summit's a much smaller site. We were able to, open the doors up a little bit more than some of our large sites, and really strong participation, and kudos again to the staff and Principal Slovin there. Over the weekend, the AAPI Commission's Western Mass Listening Session came, and our high school's AAPI club went and presented. They presented, things going well and challenges they face in our community, not just the schools, but the larger community. So kudos to the students for taking on that leadership role. And they reported that they gained diverse perspectives and unique challenges in Western Massachusetts among that community, and also shared with both Principal Sadiq and myself that Amherst Regional has taught them to think with compassion and courage, which they absolutely did from some of the photos and quotes that I saw from that group. So just want to make sure I give them a shout out, and both Principal Sadiq and I continue to ask if there are ways for us to support that group and their advocacy. And finally, I was able to give, is invited to give some lectures at UMass and Amherst College over the last couple of weeks to groups of students interested in education. And, it's really stunning sometimes the perception of Amherst Regional Public Schools and the reality of Amherst Regional Public Schools in terms of our demographics, the size of our district, and the complexity of the multiple districts. I was reminded of that when I was at those sites. In particular, Amherst College, there's some students at Amherst College who are interested in perhaps partnering with us and Debbie Westmoreland and I have been meeting with, you know, at Amherst College, a bit of reorganization. They now have someone who's in charge of community engagement. So we've had 3 or 4 meetings already this fall to try to kind of reboot our relationship with Amherst College. You know, you all saw Margot's report, so Margot's still involved, which is outstanding, but more systemically, more than just an individual student. How do we do that? I'll be there over the weekend. They invited me to meet with some students, not exclusively about Amherst Regional Public Schools, but about careers and pathways in education. And I think when we have our community partners at, you know, university and the colleges involved, that's a real benefit for our students. You know, and there's already students involved in different areas of our district, and we're trying to compile those because some of those aren't clear, but there's a women in STEM group at Amherst College that also wants to participate and support things that we have going, but we want to expand there. So, you know, we do live in this valley with great resources in terms of higher education. And one of the, you know, sort of, I don't mean goals, we'll talk about my goals later, but one of my aspirations, I should say, is to continue to improve our kind of collaboration with partner agencies, and both of those organizations are fabulous to work with, and particularly at Amherst College. We used to work with them more, you know, that faded for a whole host of reasons over time, and it's exciting to me to be reconnecting with them in some more meaningful ways and perhaps mutually beneficial ways with the college. So that's my update for tonight. I think I kept it pretty brief because I know we have other topics to go to, but certainly happy to answer any questions that anyone might have.
Any questions or comments? Go ahead, Jennifer.
I just have a question for the chair. I want to be able to reflect back on the written public comments that you displayed. Could you make sure those get posted to Board Docs so I can see them later?
Yep, that's, I'll be setting them after. And I do not have an update. Are there any school committee announcements? Ooh, I saw the physical hand from Margaret first, and then the digital hand from Peter second. So I'll go in that order.
Just quick, 2 things. I am compiling a list of acronyms. When I joined the school committee, it took me a long time to understand and gather acronyms. So if you have any acronyms that you'd like to share with me, I would appreciate it. And also, thanks to Dr. Morris, because Debbie Westmoreland has a list that they use for staff, and she sent that to me as well. So hopefully we will end up with something that we can give to new members. The other thing, just a quick report on the budget survey. It was sent out to all families through the school messenger. It was in Mike's newsletter last week. It's going to be in again this week. It was sent to officials in all 4 of the towns. It was sent to regional PGO contacts. It was sent to all of the ARPS staff. And the link will be on the website, or maybe is as of today, under news. So, and if anybody wants to share it out to people that they know, I can put the link in the chat, or yeah, I'll put the link in the chat. So, and just Deb told me today they've had 225 responses so far, which she said is a good response. So look forward to learning more when we get the results back.
Perfect. Thank you. And OMG, I would love to have a list of the acronyms as well, comma, LOL. Peter, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. So just briefly, I'm going to have my video off for most of the rest of tonight. I'm attending to some sick family members in my house, so I hope that's all right. The other item is we had our first policy subcommittee meeting of the year. So policy subcommittee is Jennifer, myself, Stephen, Sarah Beth, and Deb Westmoreland. Picked up where we left off from last year. So we'll have a few items to add during agenda planning. There's also some interesting topics coming up that Deb gave us a heads up on, one about service animals, and other about when there are requests to change our curriculum. Specifically the notion of people requesting the banning of books, which is obviously a hot topic nationally, and so our librarians had some thoughts about how we might update our policy to make that more reflective of our values. So look for that soon. Yeah, we'll be back at agenda planning with the things that we have ready.
Margaret, go ahead.
I went to the chat and it says chat is not available.
Yep, I can turn it on briefly. We tend to not have chat or share screen available just because it's a
Okay.
protection against people coming to our meeting and perhaps saying things that are objectionable, but I can turn it on briefly. Absolutely.
So maybe is it okay if I just email the link out to everybody? I mean, people can copy it if you've got it, but
The chat is
that
open, so chat away, Margaret. And then I'll just close it after I see that come
All
up.
right.
And I apologize for being cagey about that, but I've personally been in public meetings that have gotten Zoom bombed or whatever you're going to call it, and it's pretty horrific
Okay.
and affects people in many ways. So I apologize that I keep tighter controls that I know might be optimal in other scenarios, but I tend to err on that side.
See.
While we're waiting for that to pop up, so I was a jerk when I said I didn't have an update. I was actually supposed to announce something tonight, and that's the Ron Bohanowitz Ask Me Merit Award, and that's for anyone in the district can nominate a driver, maintainer, or specialist, or custodian, any member of Ask Me for outstanding work. That was in Mike's newsletter this past week as well, and I believe it'll be posted on the ARP site at some point. Oh, perfect. There it is in the chat. All right. So if there are no more announcements, we can move on to Jennifer. Go ahead.
Sorry, Margaret, is that a link you put in the chat? It doesn't look to be an actual link. Is it supposed to be a URL?
Yes.
There's no like .com.
That's what I copied out of the browser window. Give it a try.
I did.
Yeah, I think it is missing some details. I will, if there's a moment in the meeting where I'm less front and center, like perhaps the next item, because you don't want me describing a solar report. You will not learn much. I'll try to dig it out and put it on there, but it may take me a minute.
You know, I was gonna say from what I saw, it was just missing the .com because I put it into through Google. It comes up as the FY24 report. There you go. And so, am I kicking this to Mike or Rupert or Doug?
Doug's not here, so I'll kick it to Rupert briefly and just to orient, certainly not to give the report. So as you may remember, Doug is here. Doug was not at work, but he's come tonight. Thank you, Doug. The short story is, and I think it's described at the beginning of the update, that there was a solar report done. We partnered with the town of Amherst, who was also doing some work on this to economy of scale, get more done for a more efficient use of public funds. This report covered more than just the focus on the regional schools. As this regional school committee meeting, we're just going to be focusing on the regional schools. I want to again offer an appreciation for Rupert because Rupert was able to write a little long time, but like the cliff notes that kind of explain the synopsis was the term he used about what this report did. It's a very technical report, and so I think hopefully people saw that in the board docs and helped me make sense of it. And I've looked at this thing and had conversations over time about it. So what we hope to do tonight is Rupert just to share what the report indicates, how the report came to it, and then give it to you so that if there are next steps that this group wants to talk about, you have enough information to do that. So, it's not a decision-making meeting, it's really an information sharing meeting. And it was a lengthy report and a technical report. And I appreciate Rupert being here tonight yet again for a different topic to talk us through what the report found and what our potential, what's on the horizon for the regional school committee to consider. With that, I'll turn it over to you, Rupert.
Thank you, Mike. Yeah, I just want to also mention that it was thanks to some activism of environmentalist students at the high school that led to Mindy Dahm getting an earmark that allowed the region to participate in this study. So that's really wonderful. So what this study is, this is a bird's eye view of potential for generating electricity through photovoltaics and also using battery storage or energy storage systems, as they're called, ESSs, to store power and then use it at the schools or use it in the grid. This bird's eye view is really useful for us. It's not the final document, it's a step along the way. And so what I thought I'd do is kind of give you an overview of what I think are the significant parts, and also try to help explain some of the technology and some of the underlying assumptions that are behind this report, so that it's easier for folks to understand what's going on. In summary, they looked at 10 sites within the town of Amherst, including the middle school and regional high school as 2 sites, for PV and energy storage potential. And as it turns out, the middle school and high school sites turned out to be the best sites for doing photovoltaic generation and storage, largely because of large roofs, ample parking lots, and other grounds that may be available. And their study shows, based on a number of assumptions, how much money could be saved by investing in such a system. And I'd just like to say, it looks like a no-brainer. We should do this. But as I explain all of the underlying assumptions, you'll start to understand some of the reasons why we haven't started on it yet and why we're still working on it. So that said, what Cadmus did when they did this study is they took our electrical data from the region, and they took our sites and used helioscope software to evaluate how much solar potential there is on our sites. And they used some software that was developed by the Department of Energy to try to get a kind of a rough estimate of costs and the energy storage needs. All this data is based on FY19 electrical cost consumption to model, because we didn't want to use COVID years because we felt it would be skewed. And the way that this report works, just as an overview, is they look at lifetime savings for each particular property if we did the optimal PV and ESS systems. And they express that as a net present value, assuming that the equipment is functional and operational for 20 years. So that's sort of some of the parameters. Before I go into a lot of the assumptions that are behind the study, I'd like to explain a little bit about the technology for those who aren't familiar with it. They're looking at 3 types of solar panels: ground-mounted solar panels, canopy-mounted solar panels or carports, and rooftop-mounted solar panels. And in particular, I think it's important to understand what goes into rooftop solar panels. Typically, they get installed on flat roofs, but to optimize the energy from the sun, the solar panels have to be tilted at an angle. And what that does is it makes the solar panels susceptible to wind forces. And so when you mount solar panels on a roof, it's important to understand that not only is there the weight of the solar panels that you have to consider, but you also have to consider the sail effect, where the wind tries to actually pick them up off the roof and blow them away. So you have to secure it to the roof. And there are 2 common methods of doing that. One is to secure it structurally, which means bolting into structural members that may or may not be there. And the other method is called a ballast method, where the solar panels are basically weighted down with enough weight so that expected winds won't be able to pick them up. And what happens when you have a ballasted system is you have to look at the capacity of the roof to carry not only the weight of snow, also the weight of the panels, and then on top of that, the weight of the ballasts that hold the panels down. And in this sort of bird's eye view, this was not the time when they could do structural studies in the buildings and the roofs. So their assumption is in this, all the roofs could have this capacity, and they made some sort of general assumptions about the cost of installing without any kind of engineering study of the ability of the structure to support that. So there's a lot of assumptions that are built in that we would need to consider in order to make such an installation. So I'm going to try to describe roughly some of the assumptions that I have. One of the assumptions that they're very clear about in their report, and they repeat several times, is that all of their modeling and pricing is based on software with a few adjustments for the region, but it's no replacement for a cost estimator who's looking at site specific or for the marketplace of procurement. So they're basically saying, this is a general picture. This is kind of what we might expect, but conditions on the ground will vary, and so we're not guaranteeing a thing. And it's important for folks to understand that our roofs may not be able to support that kind of ballasted panel without a bunch of structural work, and that's not incorporated in their cost structures. One of their other assumptions is that there will be an energy storage system. This is important to understand because in a typical photovoltaic panel installation, the panels generate electricity, but it's only usable if the grid is up and running, because the generation system uses the frequency from the grid to align itself to maintain its frequency and to keep its power clean. So when you have a grid outage, that kind of solar panel stops supplying power as well. So if power is out, the sun is shining, doesn't matter. You don't get any power from the PV unless you have an energy storage system. Then you have a battery system that you can maintain, and you can operate in island mode so that you can function in absence of grid. So they're assuming that we would have an energy storage system, which adds significantly to cost, but also adds significantly to the resiliency of our system. They looked, in terms of climate resiliency, there's a lot of talk about how do we prepare for climate change and weather conditions that result in power outages. They looked at 24-hour storage capacity and 48-hour storage capacity. We have the information on the 48-hour, but they're going ahead on the assumption that the 24-hour is probably reasonable for our school buildings. One of the other assumptions is that the payback periods are based on our electrical needs and usages from FY19. So that was a snapshot in time. As time goes forward, we reduce our needs by installing more LED lights. We increase our power needs by moving away from fossil fuels, by providing more air conditioning in our buildings because of global warming. So that also is kind of it's a benchmark to start from. They assumed that the roofs were basically structurally able to support rooftop panels, and they assumed that the roof membranes would be sufficient for the 10-year time period that they estimate. Now, we well know that we've been trying to replace the middle school roof for years now. It is in no condition, so we're kind of stalled there in putting PV panels in, even if the structure could support it, until we can couple that with a roof membrane replacement. They also assume that the electrical services or the service from the utility company is sufficient for the needs for net metering and sending power back into the grid. And this may or may not be the case. We haven't had the analysis. The electrical service at the high school is much newer. The middle school is much older. And I do have some concerns about that. Let's see, what else do we have? A few minor issues. They also don't figure in the costs of landscaping and tree removal. To optimize solar panels in certain conditions, we would need to remove some trees. That's not figured in. So there are a bunch of just sort of costing things that at this level, at this bird's eye view where we're taking a look at things, they're not included. One of their other assumptions is something new. It's called virtual net metering. In the past, if you've generated more solar PV than you personally use, you can put it back into the grid. And there are typically limits on how much you can put back into the grid. This is a new law that would allow virtual net metering. So basically you can claim that you're putting back into the grid and then your other school building is actually using it from the grid. And it's all done sort of virtually instead of physically. If that law gets shot down, that could have some effects. And lastly, the other big assumption that they make is that we would not own the PV panels or the energy storage systems. And the reason for this is with the current structure with tax rebates, grants, and incentive programs, a lot of them are not available for municipalities and regions to access. So basically, we're in a position where we would need to be having some kind of a lease agreement with a third party who would own the equipment and would get the tax benefits and use those to help reduce our costs. So that's kind of some of the baseline assumptions. The report spends a fair bit of time looking at those various fundings and incentive programs. I don't think at this point we need to really dive into them, but they are available in the report, particularly in the appendices in the back. There's 3 of them devoted to some of the current programs that are there for incentives. But all of that said, from the bird's eye view, with all of the sort of assumptions that I've laid out, their analysis is that if we use the maximum optimal PV storage, PV and storage systems for the middle school and high school, there's a net present value of somewhere in the region of $3 million. What they're saying is, based on the price structures that they have and the assumptions they made on June 1st, if we had this in place now, over the next 20 years, we would save $3 million in utility costs, which is pretty impressive. On the other hand, a new roof for the middle school is $3 million without any structural improvements. So it's important to take it with a grain of salt. I would like to point out that in the report, which you should have in your packets, they go into individual school site analyses. I think starting on page 30 through 37, which gives you some details about the actual data that's involved and some projections about what would happen if we had a 48-hour power outage from the grid. How would we survive? And then they recommend next steps. Not only do they feel like all the stakeholders need to be informed, they recommend refining the objectives on a site-by-site basis. And they also strongly recommend that we consider a joint town district operation to do the procurement, it would give us a greater economy of scale. They feel like it would make a big difference in how we move forward. So that's the kind of the overview. I can talk more about how we might want to refine our objectives for the middle and high school, but perhaps first I should pause for questions because I've been talking for a while.
Margaret, go ahead.
So I have a question, which is, I know every year we've applied to the state for assistance in putting on the middle school roof. I assume we did that again. Do we have any news on that for this year?
I believe we are expecting to get turned down this month or next month. Mike might have some more information on it. But they're looking right now, I think, at they're only able to help out with 30-year roofs, and our roof isn't quite 30 years old yet.
Stephen, go ahead.
That is the 30-year number is correct. Shutesbury, we learned because they came up to look at our boilers that they made it very clear when they were up there they were not looking at the roof because it was not 30 years old. So we don't get it again, and neither does the middle school.
Sarah Bess, go ahead.
Okay, I have a couple of questions. I can rapid fire them. I can ask one and come back. Okay, so I think Margaret took my first question about the roof, but so I guess I have a follow-up for that. So if we're anticipating being rejected on the roof as it currently stands, if we're going to reapply again with the idea that we might want to be putting solar panels on our roof, can we change our request so that it would be structurally sound for putting solar panels on it? Or is it just like the, membrane part and doesn't actually do anything structurally when we're asking for, help to pay for our new roof?
Do you want me to jump in on that one first?
Yeah, sure.
So Doug and Mike, correct me if you have a different understanding, but I believe the MSBA subsidies exclude solar panel applications. That's a totally separate application.
Yep, I can jump in just to add to that, Rupert, if that's okay. That's true. If you want to do solar, they're not going to stand in the way, to be clear. They're not going to have an issue with it. They just won't pay for it. So I think, and they may not pay for the bolstering of the support that you need for the strength of the roof to manage what you would put on top of it. But, they're not opposed to doing their part of it. But that's beyond what the scope that they would support.
Oh, yeah, I think I was unclear. I apologize. I meant just not the solar panels themselves, but making the roof ready to support the solar panels. But you also answered my question that way too. So thank you. And then, so these go on the assumption that there is what are they called? The energy storage system, ESS, maybe. Okay, so my understanding with those, for like a house, if you have a battery in your house, they operate more along the lines of like a generator, let's say, right? So the power goes out and you can still power your parts and pieces of your house by the way things are hooked up to your battery. So does the school currently have generators that keep parts and pieces of the school running if there is a power outage? And 2, do they need to be replaced? Are they in disrepair, or does that just be part of the part of the system? Because I can't think of a time where, like, if we're having mass power outages, that we're also going to be thinking about sending the kids to school, because usually when those things happen, there's like lots of other, like the terrible ice storm that happened a bunch of years ago. Nobody went anywhere. So we weren't going to send our kids to school then either. So is that a part that has to happen too? Yep.
Sure. Do you mind me jumping in as you go?
No, it's good.
Okay. So yes, we do have generators at all of the schools, including the middle school and high school. Middle school happens to have 2. The generators are aging. We do expect that we're going to need to replace all of the generators within the next 10 years, simply because they age out. The generators are designed to carry what we call essential loads, and essential loads will provide for emergency lighting for egress to get people out safely. It will provide for enough heating to keep the building from freezing. They will provide for some level of power for our IT networks, um, and very little else. If we go with an energy storage system, PV system, we'll have an opportunity to reevaluate what are our essential loads, short term and middle term, say for several hours. Like if we're waiting for all the buses to come to the school to pick the kids up, can we keep enough lights on so that education can continue until the buses get there? And long term, like the estimated 24-hour, 48-hour outage. But yes, we do have generators. Yes, they need replacement in the foreseeable future. And if we have energy storage systems, we'll have to reevaluate what really is critical and what kind of time frame we need it for.
Okay, and then I have like one more question, and then I can be done, or I can be somebody else's turn. Okay, so when looking at the report in the beginning, it talks about being part of the different programs. It says participating in Block 11, which we're currently in Block 9. And how realistic will it be that we'll be able to be in Block 10? Because I know these studies can take an exceptionally long time with the beginning pieces of it. Is it possible that we'll actually be part of that?
Rupert, you're muted. Rupert, you're muted.
Sorry, I was pulling up the report and lost the Zoom meeting. I don't know the answer to your question. The funding structures are all moving targets. They're all changing, and so what they estimated is based on June 1st, not when we get started, which could be in a year or 2 years or 5 years, whenever it is. So it's really a moving target, and I don't think anybody really has the answers for that. But maybe Doug has more information.
Okay, thank you. That's all of my rapid fire questions.
I was gonna say, Doug, did you have anything to add to that, or?
Yeah, I can add a little bit to that and an earlier question Sarah Beth asked about the generators and the ESS. So yeah, I think that Rupert's right. It's sort of a moving target as far as the different programs and possibilities there, and so we'll have to continue to watch those, and that'll be part of what when we do a request for proposal, we'll be seeking is what they can do and projecting out the timeframes, because things. There's a lot of supports for these kind of things, but they tend to have limited time windows, and so they change and get reissued or renewed and that sort of thing. So we'll obviously have to keep an eye on that, and that'll change the economic metrics for us. I think the other thing on the energy storage, one of the conversations we had with Cadmus as far as some of our planning was, schools serve in drastic times and drastic circumstances often will serve as warming centers or a local resource. So even if we're not having kids in school, we oftentimes will use schools as places for people to go and seek emergency medical care or warming or whatever. And so that was part of the rationale with using the schools and planning, sort of a 24, 48-hour sort of window of support for emergency power, just to say, could we still, support the community in a different way? And that'll be part and parcel of conversations we have if we partner with the town, because, if you look at the section that talks about like the police stations, like very little solar resource, high level of need to keep the power running because they've got things they've got to do when things go sideways, whether it be weather related events or whatever. Same with fire. So That's where it's critical, I think, for us as a regional school district to potentially partner with the town in how we approach this and what kinds of things we want to do. Another piece that could play into that is how rapidly and in what form we end up or move toward electrifying buses, and sort of how we charge them and how we use electrical storage on site to help with that process. So there's even factors that aren't in this report that play into some of our decision and how we might approach a longer term solution.
Craig, go ahead, sir.
Thanks, guys. The ESS, just out of curiosity, would that be owned by the district, or is that owned by the third party?
Typically, that would be owned by the third party because of the tax advantages.
Okay, and the second part of the question is, I guess it says it here in your summary that the ESS is not only there for backup, but also to use regularly to offset demand pricing. It says it there,
Yes.
so I guess I didn't really
Yes.
ask, but I'm just saying that's super cool.
Yeah. It's one of those things. It's like we have electrical needs when the sun isn't shining,
Right.
and how can we take advantage of that? Exactly. Thank you for pointing
And
that out. I appreciate it.
Just one curiosity question: can you discharge energy from an ESS while charging at the same? And maybe it makes absolutely no sense, but like if demand were at 3 p.m. because everyone wants power and then the prices spike, are you able to use energy from the batteries while the sun is shining and kind of using the power as it comes? It's not a school committee question per se, but just a geek question of.
The answer is yes. Yes. There's been great headway being made in how you control your flows. And if you study the graphs in the details for middle school and high school, you'll see there's simultaneous battery charging and use of PV at the same time. How it works with some of the load shedding and load shaving functions is I don't know enough about it, frankly. It's pretty complex, but to some extent, we would give power over to ISO New England to call in chits, as it were, to reduce load or introduce power into the grid from our storage, and we would get to define that generally, and we would get to override it, but they would have that capability through the wonders of modern technology.
And is that the same theory behind the net metering, that the virtual net metering, that an excess power generated at the high school can offset costs at Bang Center to offset the demand pricing and just take and
I think it's different. I think that the virtual net metering is really a bookkeeping thing that happens, as opposed to turning on and off loads. Yeah.
And Jennifer.
So, Rupert, I'm looking at the first table in the CAMUS report, and the middle school really jumps out with its high lifetime NPV, which you mentioned. So it seems like that's seems to be one of the prime candidates. When we think about just a thought, when we think about like the size of the PV array, I want to suggest that we think about not just our past and current usage, but that we think about future usage, such as might we have some charging stations for electric buses, and what would that do to the size of the array needed? Also, I thought I recalled reading at some point that the HVAC system at the middle school was nearing the end of its life, and if we at some point in the future decide to or need to replace it, could we move to an all-electric HVAC system, and what would that do to the electricity usage at the middle school? So I'm hopeful that we can plan for the future, for potential future needs.
You guys are all great at hitting what I was going to suggest as next steps. So this is awesome. Yes. So interestingly enough, the chiller system at the middle school is well beyond its expected life, whereas the boiler system is not. So we're looking down the road at how do we manage that changeover. move, so chillers are all electric, and boilers are using fossil fuel. If we replace chillers with heat pumps that could supplement our heating, it would reduce our fossil fuels. It would increase our essential power needs. And that would have an effect on how big of an energy storage system we need to keep the building from freezing in the winter. So it is a really interesting question. It's one certainly that we have to look into. I'm sorry, was there more that I was going to?
No, that's perfect. Thank you for your response. My next question is not really related to that, which is, I know you're saying that the plan would be for the district not to own the panels; it would be owned by a third party. And I just wanted to point out, so I know this is a region building, not a town of Amherst building, but the town of Amherst's net zero bylaw does encourage ownership of the PV of the system. Rather than third-party agreements. And there are a number of benefits to owning it. And I know that there are also a lot of upfront costs. I wonder if we would consider doing an analysis of what it would look like if we did own, as opposed to having a third party owning the system.
Yeah, I mean, we certainly could look at that. Cadmus was making the assumption that we would not do that because that would drastically reduce our net present value.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions regarding the solar study? Fire away, Stephen.
Just a quick one. I know that this was started by students either 2 or 3 years ago. Have they been updated on this at all? Or, because I know it came out last spring and we put it off till now, but have they been seen it broken down like this?
Go ahead, Mike.
It's a really great question. And I wonder if, our students change frequently, right? They come to us, they stay with us, they graduate, and that's one of the both wonderful and challenging things around that. But I do wonder if there's an opportunity perhaps for the club that's focused on environmental issues at the secondary school to have an opportunity to review the report. And I think the summary is particularly important. Again, they know undoubtedly will be able to interpret the report more than me. I'm low on that scale. But also giving them an opportunity to ask some questions. I think that's a great idea. And Steve, that's something we can, I'll make sure I work with Principal Sadiq to do. Thank you for suggesting it. Really appreciate it. Doug also has his hand up.
Yeah, what I'll add is that we did speak with them as we were getting started in the process with Cadmus. And unfortunately sort of school ran out before we got all the details back from Cadmus. We were going to try to cycle back with the kids on that during last year. We definitely can do that and connect with that club for sure. And then obviously there's some folks that are alumni now that we may reach out to just so that they know that their efforts were successful. I think they're aware in some respects, but to give them a little more specific, so we can do that outreach as well. But certainly it's on my sort of list to kind of connect with that club again and sort of engage them in that regard.
Thank you. Jennifer, go ahead.
Sorry, just back on the idea of purchasing the system. I recall hearing from in the Fort River project that the Inflation Reduction Act has some incentive and tax has some cash credits that are available for PV projects. So, or are there other federal or state programs that might make public entities like a school district eligible for benefits for PV programs? I just again want to make sure that we're checking all the boxes and turning over all stones to determine if it really is the best thing to not own the system.
Go ahead, Ben.
I can take a little bit of that. I think that, yeah, it's an ever-changing landscape. There's some significant changes that have come through the infrastructure bill and some other things, and I think that'll continue to be the case. So as we move ahead and think about sort of how we want to structure this, I think that's part of what we put into the RFP is perhaps asking a question of comparing and contrasting ownership versus non-ownership. Some of the people that are going to respond are going to want to own it because they feel like they can make the most money that way, and we're going to want the most economically advantageous over the long haul. So we need to look at the entirety of the process. It may be a thing where in the short term, being the first 20 years, it's owned by the third party where we may lease to own or something like that. So it could be a transitional ownership picture. There's a number of different ways to sort of play on this. So I think those are all options we have to kind of consider and things we want to think about as we start to ask for specific proposals from them and like I said earlier, sort of partner with the town to see if how we put together a totality package may make sense to do that or not do that. There's a lot of pluses to owning your own stuff. You're not having to sort of contend with somebody else and the changes that they're under and the stresses they're under economically that we experience much differently. But nonetheless, the short-term current status as of like June, it had some significant advantages to have that third party. But that landscape changes all the time, and so we have to keep an eye on that and consider that as we move ahead for sure.
All right, thank you. And are there any other questions regarding the Rupert Roy Clark? Go ahead.
I'd like to say that in general, I prefer the ownership model. I feel like it gives us a lot more control over situations. This is a case where I would consider giving it up, both for financial reasons and because the technological challenges with maintaining the complex system would require a lot of training and some additional staffing that could be hard to find. I think we sort of touched on what I think the district next steps are already, if I may summarize, Ben. So I think we need to better define what are the critical loads for each of the buildings and what functions we need short-term power for, long-term power for, 24-hour for. That needs definition. It's going to involve, I think, some deep dives into some engineering and testing to get there. I think we need to, we might want to consider re-engaging Cadmus with newer data because we've installed a bunch of LED lights since their study that could reduce some of our baseline loads. And also we seriously need to look at what's going to happen as we replace air conditioning at the middle school, supplement air conditioning at the middle school because it's not quite adequate for the building. And as everyone knows, the majority of the high school, large sections of the high school don't have air conditioning or have window air conditioners that are insufficient for the task and are at their expected lifespan. So there's a lot of moving parts there that we're going to probably want some consultation. And then also expanding electric fleet and the infrastructure will have demands on PV, but it also has the potential to supplement PV. There are systems that allow battery storage from the buses to feed back into the grid. We wouldn't normally do that, but if schools were closed and we were in a true emergency, it might be something to consider. And lastly, I think we need to bite the bullet and get some better structural analysis. We've already started on parts of the middle school roof. I think we need to probably spend some money on the main middle school roof and the high school roof to really get that information out and ready. It was a challenge to get definitive answers because we didn't have a model of how many panels we wanted. Now that we have this report, we can share it with structural engineers who can say, oh, you want to have this many panels, this size. Okay, we can do that. So I think those are some of the next steps that we should be looking towards. Thank you.
Perfect. Is there any more discussion regarding the solar study? Stephen, go ahead.
So that's cool to get ready for this. Then we got to repave the student parking lot now just to get ready to put the solar on there. So let's do it. We talked about that about 5 years ago.
Yeah, I think we should repave it now so that later we can dig it up to put conduit in.
Fair. Go ahead, Jennifer.
Before we go on to the next agenda item, can we take a 5-minute break?
Sure. So I have 8:45 and we'll return at 8:50. Go ahead before we go.
Ben, are you done with me, or should I plan on returning?
Currently done with you, but definitely return at some point.
Today?
No, not today. So
Oh,
thank,
okay.
thank you very much for your time tonight. Too.
Fair enough. Thank you all. Thank you all. Good night.
Good night. we'll give it a few more and then get right back into it. All right. So the next topic is the 2023-2024 school year calendar. Do you want to?
Yeah, and this is a brief topic. So just for people who haven't been through it, our process as per contract, but also more than contract as per tradition, because we go above and beyond that, is we collaborate with our bargaining unit, the APEA, on this. We gather feedback. We encourage them to gather feedback from their members. We generally produce 2 or 3 different models for their consideration. You may remember from last year that one of their requests was to include Yom Kippur as a day off instead of an early release day, which we formerly had it. So we made that change based on, or I recommended that change, and the school committee voted it based on that feedback. Doreen and I met with the APA on Friday. They said they were in the process of gathering feedback. So there's no action that's being taken, but we did want to share those schedules with you as well as members of the public, because we have a lot of people interested in knowing well ahead of time the start time of the school year. You can see all 3 have slightly later start times than we had this year, and some of that's just this year we have really long, like our December break happens to be long based on what days of the week certain holidays fall out on, and that's not the case as we look to the next school year. So it does involve at least the potential to have a more concise school year, because there's fewer days off again in that December break. But open to any feedback that anyone would have. And my process would be, I'll wait to receive feedback from APEA, bring back these models as well as a recommendation, so you know what the APA is recommending. But I'm happy to answer any questions or receive them, later electronically from any school committee members about, these potential models.
Jennifer.
So, Mike, these models 1, 2, and 3 were developed, and these 3 were shared with the APEA, and now we're waiting on getting input from them. And were staff involved in the developing of the 3 options?
So the APA actually has some nice ideas about making a larger group to develop them. We generally go based on, we tend to get lots of feedback about the schedule. Never at school committee meetings, interestingly, or rarely, but often just from people. And so we base it on some of the feedback that we routinely receive. Like I mentioned, the Yom Kippur example in particular, because that was a specific piece of feedback we received last year from the APEA. We've evolved with, other things. It says budgetary consideration, but some of it's just staffing consideration. There are certain holidays, 3 Kings Days, another example. We may want to take that off anyway, but the reality was a significant part of our staff was taking that as a religious holiday, as they should, and it made the point of it costs a lot more to run school that day, and school is much less effective because we were struggling to find subs. So some of that's just a practical reality of that. We also had a number of students taking that day off, and we think about which students would take that day off. It raised some equity concerns from our vantage point. So the 3 models aren't much different. It's how early do you want to start and how early do you want to end? And there's a 1-to-1 correlation pretty much on those 2 variables. I know I got some feedback. We should start later and end earlier. I was like, okay, the only way we could do that is not to have as many days off. No, we don't want that. So, we need 180 days one way or the other for our students. So there's really fixed variables in this model. I think we get a lot of feedback. Some of it we can do things with, some of it we really can't do much with. School committee has a policy, for instance, that we need to have February and April vacations. That's like another common piece of feedback we received, is particularly for people who work at a university on a faculty job, why doesn't the March break or spring break, I guess, would probably be considered a line. And there's a whole lot of reasons why that went into that policy. This is not at all critiquing policy. I 100% endorse the school committee policy that way. But we get a lot of those questions, and the short answer is, well, we can't, because unless the policy changed, we couldn't. So, there's more fixed variables than there are flexible variables, but it's really about when do we want to start, when do we want to end.
Gotcha. My feeling is that absent a compelling reason for a significant change, I would like to have the calendar be similar to the previous year, because it's what people expect. They plan their summer their summer plans based on what they know. But there may be a compelling reason to make a change, but absent a compelling reason, I would prefer to go with something close to the previous year. It looks like option 3 is very different. And so I'm looking forward to hearing what APEA's input is on that one, with everyone starting after Labor Day and with a later than we're used to end date. But it's nice to hear
Yeah.
options.
Could I comment on that? Because I think I should have referenced that in the introduction. The reason that is in there is contractually, we are contractually obligated to provide a year that has a September 1st, no earlier than September 1st start date. It's in our contracts. And so in the past, our bargaining units have not supported that latest start date for a whole host of reasons. But it's in there because we are contractually obligated to include that in there. I think it would be I agree with your earlier statement, and it would be a marked change to have a start date that late. And the year 2 years ago, we ended on June 25th, I think we had snow days and there was other variables that year, but I think most people do not want to relive that late an end date, staff or students or families. It actually got really complicated, much like you're saying, planning the summer. Some people had summer plans that were affected, or they had to make really difficult decisions. We have a lot of people in our community who have family members who live very, very far away, and they need to plan long in advance about seeing their family members during the summer. So I agree with you, but that is why we include that option. It's not something, usually I have this statement, which is mostly true, which is I don't feel that strongly about calendars. I work all year anyway. And, on a personal level, it really doesn't have an impact. But that's not entirely true, because I think that long a summer for many of our students would have some really negative implications. And extending the year, my experience is June 20 something, like it doesn't matter what the day is after the 20, ends up being a very difficult day to get high quality learning in. And we actually get really high quality learning in late August. Like, it's a great time for the introductions. And so, I think if it came to that, I would probably jump in with my opinions, but it is a contractual obligation to include that model for consideration by our bargaining units.
All right. Craig, go ahead.
Just very quickly, just because I represent Leverett and part of Union 28, and I'm Mike, you and Jen both report back the same thing, that you work very well together. I would encourage you to always send her what's under consideration, because it always comes up in U28 discussions. Thanks.
All right. Any other calendar input? All right. We'll move ahead to the CRESS MOU. Did you want to present that, Mike, or?
I think if people are okay, I think it might be helpful to have on the screen. It's been adjusted significantly. Some people might have seen it, and the public could have seen a version, not significantly, but it's been updated. I won't put a qualifier on it, since a different committee met last week and took a look at it. And so for members of the public who may be looking at it, I just want to be clear that this is not the same. Oop, that's a different document. Give me 1 second. I apologize.
Mike, are you looking for a vote tonight, or is this informational?
This is, oh yeah. So let me just queue it up, and then I will be more attuned to queuing it up orally. So I was having some technical problems, but I think it's been resolved. Yeah. This is not a vote. So memorandums of understanding in general are, the signatories at the bottom would be myself, or Earl, who is the CRESS director, and the town manager in the town of Amherst, because these are town funded positions. So really tonight it'd be looking for feedback if there is any adjustments that you would like to suggest. And then I would bring this. Earl and Paul have both seen this document, are very comfortable. Our legal counsel has done a thorough review, made edits that have been incorporated into the document. And so tonight is just, if there are questions, if there's feedback, if there's something missing, if there's something in there that you're uncomfortable with, I would love to hear it, because while it's not a vote that ever would come to this committee, I want it to be something that this committee would not formally with a vote, but would endorse and feel comfortable moving forward with. And we're, I feel good about where it is, and I feel really good about our working relationship with our partners at CRES. And I think that's the queuing up I was going to do.
Sarah Bess, go ahead.
I think I have mostly a technical question. So it says between Amherst and the Amherst Pelham Regional School Districts. So the Amherst Pelham Regional School District includes Pelham Elementary, correct? Am I misreading this? Am I?
Technically, no, it would not be inclusive of Pelham Elementary School. So Amherst Pelham Regional School District is the entity that's meeting tonight. And the Amherst Public Schools are a municipal district in the town of Amherst. I think what you are correct is ARPS as an acronym has been seen as encompassing all three districts informally. But like in my signatory, like when I'm bottom of my email, I say superintendent of the Amherst Pelham and Amherst Pelham Regional School District, because Pelham Schools is not part of a regional school district.
Okay. So this just means, all right, thank you. That is.
But it's a nightmare to manage the nomenclature and the connotation. So I'm glad you're raising it, because until you said it, honestly, I had not considered that. And ARPS, certainly informally, people do perceive it, and I use it to describe all three districts. So I got to think through how to manage that a little better, because I don't want there to be confusion.
I mean, I am all for CRES having a, working agreement with the middle and high school. It was just the language piece, making sure we're all understanding. That's all. Thank you.
Really helpful. Thank you, Sarah Bess.
Peter, go ahead.
Yeah, so I mean, similar comments to another committee where we reviewed this. I really appreciate the work that that Earl and the rest of the CRES team has put into this, and the town manager, and all the feedback incorporated into this based on our initial discussions. I think like all the concerns, at least for me, the concerns that needed to be highlighted are in there in terms of clear lines of authority and services only when agreed upon, and not a full-time presence. And I think it's a real great start of a relationship where our students and our principals are going to be receiving a level of service that if for some situations was needed and was not there before. These are difficult situations, but our principals, Principal Steek at the high school, Principal Sharon at the middle school, have to deal with from time to time. And when it exceeds their capacity of the services they have, they need other experts to engage. And so I look at this as like an extension of wraparound services. I mean, I can think of 10 or 20 other services I would love to fund for our schools in terms of like holistic wraparound services. But this is one that particularly when it's about supporting conflict resolution, when it's about supporting people in the community, when it's about giving more resources to our principals, it's a really excellent thing. So I really appreciate that. My only comment on next steps would be to run it by Principal Sadiq and Principal Sharon, and just make sure that this jives with what their expectation and desire is. They may have some small wording adjustments here or there, or add something that we may not have thought of because we don't have their point of view on the ground. But I really appreciate all the work that's been put into this.
Margaret, go ahead.
I would echo what Peter said and just say I think this has the potential to provide some really excellent service in the schools, and perhaps prevent difficult situations for the students. So I think to me it looks good.
And Jennifer, go ahead.
So I'm now putting some things together based on what Sarah Beth pointed out, that the MOU says Amherst and Amherst Pelham Regional School Districts, and the fact that Peter just mentioned Principal Sadiq and Principal Sharon, and I think that Earl had said that they mostly are going to work with middle school and high school students, but like if the Amherst School District, and in fact, the Amherst School Committee did review this. I don't think I'm breaking any open meeting laws by saying that. So like, if we're going to have principals review it, we might as well have all of the principals review it, including the elementary principals.
Yep, thank you, and Principal Slovin as well, at Summit. So, yep, point well taken. Thank you.
Was that an errant hand wave or okay? Do we have any other questions or comments regarding the MOU with Chris? All right. That's an actual hand. All right, go ahead, Craig.
Yeah, sorry, just my screen was at a weird level. What's the time frame, Mike, that you'd like some feedback?
I think if there's feedback, what I'd like to do is sort of had a goal of having this, right, there's other people who have to sign it, right? So it's not just me. But, we were hoping to get this pretty much wrapped up by the end of this month. So I think if there is feedback from the committee, additional feedback, I'd love to receive it this week so I can work next week with Earl and with Paul to, hopefully move forward. I think some of the suggestions I got tonight will need some tweaking. I did some tweaking based on, some really helpful feedback from a different committee last week. And the tweaking really matters, right? Because once it's done, yes, you can make changes afterwards. We added language around that, but reviewing it annually isn't the same as the work you do on the front end. So really any feedback would be welcome, but it'd be great if people were able to send that along this week.
Perfect. So next up we have superintendent goals, and this could potentially lead to a vote. That's like the goal here, right? All right.
Could be a goal, but sorry, just play on words late at night. So, but yeah, let me, hopefully this comes up more easily for me.
Yeah, I was just trying to match Sarah Bess's bus stop comment from before. That was like so perfectly timed.
All right, so thank you for the feedback last time. So revised draft, maintain the capital plan, added explicit focus on well-being and mental health to goal number 2. The other piece was goal number 5. I thought about the conversation we had about this, the district strategic plan, and what all the principals and all of my districts are actually working on this year is very intentional school improvement planning. And I thought that was actually the best way to weave that in. Because really the next step when that district improvement plan was created a couple years ago was for schools to take that and write school specific plans, and then pandemic and everything shifted. And so I was trying to take both the feedback that I received from this committee and then practically what we're spending a lot of time at our level and the leadership level doing is having principals work with stakeholders, staff, students, community on school specific plans of what those goals look like in their building. So I know it's not quite the same as what was discussed by this committee, but I did think it's tangible. And I think when we get closer to students, that's where I'd like some of my actions to be, right? Some of our discussions can feel really close to students. Some of it can feel pretty far. And so this felt a little more tangible to me than that work. It's also, I like when there's a through line between the goals that I have and the goals principals have. Every single one of my principals has a goal that's around their school improvement plan and getting community engagement on that. And while that is approved by the superintendent as per Mass General Law, it's certainly something we can bring back to the larger committee just so you can see the work, because I think it really matters and it sets the stage for future goals at the school level that are close to students. So that's what I did with the feedback I received. Again, I'm open to any edits, revisions. I'm also open to taking larger feedback and coming back in a couple of weeks if that's what the committee would like to do. But that's sort of what I tried to put together. And I tried to get this stuff online. I think most of it was online last Wednesday, so that hopefully there was enough time to review, because I know there was a lot of documents, especially the solar one that was lengthy. So I apologize for the amount of documents, but we tried to get them a little early so people could look at it. And that's, I'm happy to answer any questions, but that's sort of a summary of where we are.
Peter, go ahead.
I think this is a good distillation of the previous multiple discussions on this. I think in terms of it's a structural challenge to manage the number of goals here with the 3 districts, and I think you've done a good job here. I do like the addition of the reference to the district improvement plan. I think that could be a recurring theme in the coming years for goals to sort of get that restarted post COVID interruption. Yeah, I guess if you could just talk a little bit about like what are, you don't have to get all the details, but so number 2, provide additional resources, training, and supports to promote student sense of safety, security, and belonging. That can mean a lot of things. Just talk about like what are some of the kinds of things that you might be thinking about, so we have an idea of like what sort of focus that might trend towards.
Yeah. So, and I struggle with that one to make it more specific because safety is so multifaceted. So I'll give you an example. So last week, 2 weeks ago, there was we did ALICE training for staff members. ALICE is a state recommended safety protocol in high stress safety situations, physical safety situations. We are at the high school we did a little more next steps, and we're talking to students about integrating students into that activity. So that's something that's really about safety in the physical sense. We're also meeting Thursday at a leadership team with Paul, who is the head of Bright. And so Bright does Bright programs, but they also do a lot of work on well-being and mental health of students. And so we work with Paul frequently and his staff, but he's doing some work with our leadership team about how to integrate that into things like school improvement plans and process and protocol. Not just we know that more students than average are having a hard time, right? Like any other school with those matters, but getting tangible. So, I think I just give those 2 examples because they're in chronologically, they're happening at a very similar time. They're both about safety, but their focus is quite different. Some of the resources have been that we've added some positions through ESSER funding that are directly connected to student safety and the climate and culture of our schools. So that's where, the language, I struggled making it more specific because, the interventions at play aren't always feeling as connected because I think feelings of safety, security, and belonging look really different. I mentioned that during superintendent update, some work happening, and I wouldn't at all take credit or put it in my artifacts, but it's fabulous that we have affinity groups that are doing such great advocacy work beyond our school walls. And so that's another part of it, right? So that's not necessarily Bright. It's not necessarily dealing with, physical safety. And in terms of security, safety, and belonging, absolutely. How else can we support students to be meeting as affinity groups and advocating not just locally but regionally for matters of equity? So, I think it's intentional, but it's not necessarily chronologically easy to describe. And so those are some of the examples just because they're proximate, but they happen throughout our school year, and that's sort of our intentional focus that way.
Any other questions or comments about the superintendent goals? All right, would anyone like to make a motion, perhaps? Sarah Bess.
I move we accept the superintendent goals as presented. Is that an appropriate motion? Is that how that goes? Okay, yeah, that's my motion then.
Second.
Moved by Sarah Bess, seconded by Margaret. I'll look around to open it up for discussion. Doesn't look like there's any bites, so I will take a roll call vote. Stephen?
Sullivan, aye.
Sarah Bess?
Sarah Bess, aye.
Peter?
Peter, aye.
Margaret?
Margaret, aye.
Jennifer?
Jennifer, aye.
Craig?
Craig, aye.
And me, Ben, aye. Motion passes unanimously. So we'll move on to the CES vote, the Capital Reserve Fund. Do we have We have that document to present as well.
Yep, I'm bringing it up right now.
Alrighty.
So this was also in the packet well ahead of time. I know it's a bit of a technical or field reads as a technical item, but it essentially is that CES is requesting that they're able to set up a capital reserve fund, right? They're not asking for money from any of the member districts. There's not about fees, but it's that they have funds and they don't have an account to be able to use them in this way, and they have significant number of capital needs. I've been there. I agree with them that I'm not an expert. I'm not Rupert, but there's a lot of it's. I think the lay person who's in their building, some of you have been there perhaps in the past, recognize that there's significant capital needs there. They also have a school that we've had students in the past attend as out of district placement. But there are some improvements to that school, and that is an option for us. So, for me, I don't have any concerns about, this particular proposal from the collaborative. They're really strong partners with us. And they're basically asking that they have funds and to use them to improve the capital situation in their building. So, I support, the executive director Gazda. Irv, I know, is one of the reps. He's unfortunately not here tonight, but there's nothing about this particular motion that I have concerns about. If it did, I, would certainly address them. And, this is going around to all the member districts who are in CES. They need a certain percentage of them to vote because it's a member-driven organization. So I think if there's any questions people have, I will try to answer them. If people have questions I can't answer, I'll take them and send them over to Executive Director Gazda and get you answers for the next meeting if folks aren't comfortable voting yet tonight.
Margaret, go ahead.
I would just like to say I was a representative to CES for a while, and it was eye-opening. So what they do, and I think that if they need us to say, yes, we think this is a good idea, we should.
Thank you. Craig, go ahead.
So we saw this in Leverett at our last month's meeting, and we supported it. I support the idea of a capital reserve fund. Clearly, it just creates flexibility in an organization their size that they need. But the thing that I said then, I'll say now, it really has no effect on any vote for this, is that all this money came from a PPP loan that was forgiven by the federal government. So this is a massive gift from taxpayers in the United States. So I just asked, the question is if anyone knew, and I've not done my due diligence to go look, but if there's any way they're kind of paying it forward, and not just in capital investment, but in spreading it around a little bit. And maybe capital is what is needed. And I don't know, because I'm no longer, I also was on the CS board for a couple of years, and it was very interesting. It's a well-run organization. So I support this fully. If anyone has curiosity that it reminds me to check in again. Thanks.
Yeah, Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think that's spot on, and I think really critical and good feedback. I think from what I've heard from folks at CES, the challenge they have is they try really hard not to assess capital fees to their member districts because they know their member districts have their own capital challenges that they're trying to face. So I think for them, everything you said is correct, and they're saying this may be a one-time opportunity to resolve some long-term capital needs that they really are limited to be able to do. I think it just, well, I'll get ahead of myself, but I think in some ways the region faces the same challenges where we have capital needs, but the municipal districts or municipal towns have their own capital needs, and it sometimes brings up challenges, and they're at a scale well beyond the regional schools. So absolutely agree with your point, and I can share that kind of perspective with Executive Director Gaz. I'll be at a meeting with him tomorrow, but I think that's spot on.
Craig again.
I'll move to approve the sorry, I just gotta go back to the agenda. Let's see what it's called. The capital reserve the establishment of a capital reserve fund with a limit of $5 million for the CES.
Second.
Go ahead, Peter.
Do we know if there's any legal requirement for why they worded it exactly on the page? I'm just wondering if we pass it, I don't know why they worded it exactly like they did, but or if we have I just wouldn't want to pass the motion and then come back to find that like we didn't word it correctly.
So I don't know the answer to the question, but my guess is legal counsel for their organization liked the particular language that's on the, I fast forwarded after Craig had started. I apologize, Craig. That specific language is probably likely, I would guess, because they have many school committees voting on this. And so if school committees vote on different language, then legally it gets a little gray.
So, Craig, Peter, go ahead.
I was just going to say the easiest thing to do is to ask Craig if he wants to make a friendly amendment and then just read the line off the page.
Yeah, that's where I was going.
Sure, I'm a little confused. I'm not sure which line you're talking about.
So from the word vote all the way to the end.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, so I'll agree to that friendly amendment. That's fine. Trying to read it. It's okay. It's on the screen. It's recorded.
Yeah. Do we need to read it for posterity's sake?
We should read it for people who are vision impaired.
Absolutely.
Sure. Thank you. So this is certification of board vote. That part here.
No, the proposed motion for school committee approval just above that.
Proposed motion for school committee approval to approve the creation of the Collaborative for Educational Services Capital Reserve Account with a balance of $5 million for the purpose of accumulating funds for the acquisition, maintenance, and improvement of capital items.
I second that motion.
Moved by Craig, seconded by Peter. All right. We'll open up for discussion if need be. Seeing no urgent jump for discussion, we will take a roll call vote. Stephen.
Sullivan, aye.
Sarah Bess.
Sarah Bess, aye.
Peter.
Peter, aye.
Margaret.
Margaret, aye.
Jennifer.
Jennifer, aye.
Craig.
Craig, aye.
And Ben, aye. The motion passes unanimously with two folks absent. We'll move on to future agenda planning. Bring up the doc. Go ahead, Mike. Sorry.
So just one thing to note, and Ben and I were in touch with this yesterday, is that originally we had this on November 8th. November 8th is election day. It's the guidance we've received is we ought to not have public meetings on election day. It's frowned upon and maybe a little beyond that. So we will be looking to reschedule for a different day of the week that week. Different day that week. Sorry, I said that awkwardly. The agenda topics we currently have we have a lot of them, so I'm not sure this is becoming a reasonable meeting, but in terms of length, but we have 3 policies for first read. There was a request for an update on track and field fundraising. There was a request for, FY23 Q1, student cell phone usage. There was a request to talk about safety, external and internal safety matters, returning to in-person school committee meetings, and potentially, actually, I think Mark Terry is planning to come potentially to talk about the regional agreement if the regional school committee wants to engage in amending the regional school committee, not the content, but the process end of that. So feels like a lot, but, and there may be other topics we want to bring up.
Craig, go ahead.
I think earlier in this meeting, Peter suggested having a vote for the transportation issue. So would support that.
Jennifer?
Two things. The discussion about the solar study reminded me about the electric bus application. So I don't know, could we get like an update on the application for the grant that we submitted for the electric bus? And secondly, Ben, I had sent you an email about the track, and I know that I see that we're going to have an update on the fundraising, but the topic of artificial turf has come up a little bit in public comment, and I just want to talk about. I think I know the situation we're in, but I just want to talk about that situation and what our options are. Do we have any options when it comes to the track and field? I think we should just air out and talk about where things currently stand, not just with the fundraising, but with the with the crux of the project.
So I could be wrong here, but I think that we could have a discussion about it, but it would be a non-binding discussion. Like we can't change anything that we've voted already.
Yeah.
And we also wouldn't have the Board of Health. And well, it's possible that we would have the Board of Health information considering that we're changing the date.
Oh.
So is there anyone else that wanted to weigh in on that? Peter, in terms of process?
Yeah, so first, just to close the book on a couple of other items, just FYI for the public, the policies that we'll be looking at next time are BEDH, public participation at committee meetings, GBEA, code of conduct for public employees, and DFE, fiscal management royalties. And thank you, Craig, for the bus arrival times. If we could just post that as possible vote, just to give us the option, depending on where we're at. Yeah, I mean, as far as the track and artificial turf and whatnot, so, the motion we passed 6 or 7 months ago was a capital debt authorization that specifically said the synthetic surface, if we do achieve the funding level for doing the field, and because action has already been taken on that motion, it's not possible to go back and change that. So since then, that capital expenditure has been presented to the Amherst Town Council and the town meetings of Pelham, Levitt, and Shutesbury. They've reviewed and approved that Amherst CPA has approved expenditure of funds based on our plan, as well as all the fundraising that has gone on. So that's clearly the bar of action has been taken, and I certainly would not support a vague general agenda item about the track that would invite the sense that we are somehow not committed to something we've already decided, and that we can't change procedurally, like we're not able to change. That being said, the topic in general about what kind of materials we might use with a synthetic field is still to be determined, right? And there's a lot of variability there. But we're not even going to know if we're going to do the field until after next January. And so, my feeling on agenda planning is that, let's have the discussion about field, and then are we using synthetic infill? Are we using organic infill? How do we want to determine that? How do we want to evaluate vendors, responsibility of vendors, and how do we want to select? All those sorts of implementation issues are, I think, appropriate once we have it determined whether we're going ahead with the field or not. But I certainly would not, based on a couple of, a new advocacy, want to create the seeds of doubt that we can somehow change what has already been decided.
So sans the information about fundraising, like not knowing that we met the bar or not, it kind of, we would have a conversation based on a moot point if we were talking about, the synthetic versus natural turf, if we wind up doing the base project anyway, right? That's fair to say. Jennifer, go ahead.
Well, so I see your point. I see Peter's point that we don't want a vague agenda item, and we did vote what we voted, but I would like the opportunity to have this discussion. I don't know what you would call it on the agenda, but I mean the Amherst Town Council last week delayed their necessary next step in transferring the money to the school districts because they were concerned about the content of the artificial turf issue. So that's new information that like they were supposed to take a step to transfer the funds that they had committed to, but they didn't do it because they need to talk about it more. So I just feel like it is a weird situation that we're in, and maybe there's nothing we can do at this point until we have more information. But I feel like the conversation that we just had, I'd like to be able to talk about it more at length in an actual agenda item with not at 9:30 at the end of a meeting.
Peter, go ahead.
Yeah, so that's not my understanding of why the town council delayed the vote. They delayed it because they were caught up in a different discussion, and I don't think it's I don't remember what Jennifer just said, but just to clarify my own understanding, the town council en masse did not express concern about the materials. I mean, the thing that I don't want to have happen is our committee to introduce confusion into an active fundraising effort that is based on the fact that we've already decided on a synthetic field. Now, it's you could say it's a nuance of how do you implement that synthetic field, right? Because there's a difference potentially, say, between, and I'm not going to opine on give my opinion on what I prefer right now, because we're not deliberating the topic. We're just talking about whether it should be on the agenda, right? And so there are implementation details to be defined about how do you implement a synthetic surface and what kind of infill to use, and those are all valid questions. But we don't have a confirmation that we're doing a field yet, and we don't want to introduce confusion if there happens to be some advocacy that has concerns about synthetic fields in general. I don't think it's any issue, for example, during the a discussion of fundraising to say, hey, I've heard some concerns from people during the fundraising about the infill materials potentially for a synthetic field. I think that's fine, but just to clarify for the public, as we're in this odd interregnum spot between now and the deadline in January, we want to make sure that we don't introduce confusion into volunteers that are working really hard to try and raise funds for our schools for a needed resource.
Margaret?
I guess I was thinking sort of along the same lines as Peter. If there's going to be information about the project at the next meeting, couldn't we just say, acknowledge that there's been some questions about artificial turf, but that will be an issue later because the artificial turf is part of, we can't change what was voted. I mean, can't we just say that and say there will be more discussion about the type of artificial turf if we raise the money? And just leave it at that, not have a discussion, but just acknowledge what we've heard.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think I'm like right down the middle here because I do think that it's a worthy discussion at some point. I also don't want to end up having like a long drawn out discussion that we regret having 2 months later because it's a non-starter at that point, right? Like, I'm more curious I'm more curious about the original agenda item being the fundraising aspect of it than I am to dive into the minutia of how we're going to do it right now. I don't think we're there yet, but I'll take Peter and then Craig.
Yeah, just real briefly, I think what Margaret suggests is totally appropriate. I mean, I think as people engage in the fundraising, they're saying, oh, interesting, what kind of field did the school committee approve? They approved a synthetic field. Oh, can that change? And the answer is no, it can't change. And then, oh, what about the implementation? Have they decided on that? No, they have. Like, I think clarifying those questions for the public and just talking about the process and, oh, what is this January deadline anyway? And what is the trigger point? I think that's totally appropriate in the bounds of an agenda item that covers fundraising. Just to clarify for the public what the process is, because people are hearing about this now. Oh, the fundraising is going on. What's the status? What can be changed? What has been decided?
Craig? You're on mute. You're still muted.
Thanks. Sorry. I would agree with that, not unless anything, but with the caveat or addition of everyone's waiting on the Board of Health to review something and make a statement. If there's a statement that causes concern for this committee, I think then it's appropriate to have an agenda item to discuss that, discuss the procedure of what has happened, what could happen. That's fine. Otherwise, it's part of a process of something that is seemingly already decided, is how I feel about it.
Right, right. Because if something came along that made the other two options non-feasible, well, then we'd have to talk about that in terms of fundraising and what our off ramp for that is. So, does anybody have anything else to add on here? Nothing pressing. And we will move on to Mike.
I'm sorry, Ben.
Yep.
So we'll just on next step, because we don't have a date. I think I'll work with Ben and we'll probably send out a doodle poll or something like that to see what date works for the greatest number of people that week. And, I would guess also, I'll go on a limb to say Ben and I will talk about, perhaps spreading out some of the agenda items over 2 meetings, because I think to the point someone raised earlier, it's late. We don't necessarily want to continue having meetings that go on this late, because it reduces the quality, in my opinion, reduces the quality of, I will speak for myself. It reduces the quality of my participation in a meeting. I won't make a comment for anyone else's feelings about when you hit over 3 hours in a meeting. So I'll work with Ben on those. I just wanted both to know, the committee know, A, we'll send something out to try to find a possible date, and B, the agenda will not be as lengthy as what we're talking about here for the next meeting. That was it.
Fair enough. Then we will sort of move on to warrants. We don't have Irv here to read any. So that means at a future meeting, it's going to be a long item. And gifts. And double check, make sure nothing popped up since last. There we go. I don't see any gifts in the agenda. So I will move to convene into executive session. The regional school committee will now consider entering executive session in accordance with open meeting law, Mass General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 21A, to conduct collective bargaining sessions and to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining or litigation of APEA. If an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the bargaining or litigation position of the public body, and the chair so declares, and I do declare, and to approve minutes in accordance with the open meeting law, Mass General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 22, with no intention of returning to open session.
I'll second.
Moved by me, seconded by Craig. No need for discussion, so I'll take a roll call vote here. Craig.
Craig, aye.
Jennifer.
Jennifer, I.
Margaret.
Margaret, aye.
Peter.
Peter, aye.
Sarah Bess.
Sarah Beth, aye.
Ben, aye. And Stephen.
Sullivan, aye.
It is unanimous. And we have to wait for Mike to do some magic here. Yep.
In about 30 seconds.
Yep.